Welcome back, everyone. We all have our daily routines, paths we walk, and places we feel safe. Our neighborhood, the street we live on, the drive home late at night. We move through these spaces with a sense of security, believing we know them. But what happens when that security is shattered by the feeling of being watched, of being followed? What happens when a familiar place suddenly feels menacing? Today we're going to explore several chilling accounts from people whose ordinary days took a terrifying turn when they realized they were not alone. These are stories about intuition, close calls, and the unsettling reality that danger can appear when and where you least expect it. Before we begin, let us know in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is. Stay aware and stay safe. New Year's Eve of 2024 was supposed to be a perfect night. My friends and I had gone to a party, and we had a designated driver, my responsible, always prepared friend, Kevin. We were all crammed into his spacious SUV. The music was blasting, and we were all laughing and singing along, still buzzing with the celebratory energy of the holiday. It was around 2 a.m, and we were on our way to my house, the last drop-off of the night. The roads in my quiet suburban neighborhood were completely deserted, the houses dark and sleeping. We were all in such a good mood that no one noticed the headlights that had been behind us for the last 10 minutes. It was not until Kevin turned onto my street, a small, dead-end cul-de-sac, that I noticed them. A dark blue Ford Escape had made the turn right behind us. I did not think anything of it at first. It was probably a neighbor coming home late. Kevin pulled into my long, narrow driveway and put the car in park. I was just starting to gather my things when the blue Ford Escape pulled up right behind us, its front bumper just inches from Kevin's rear bumper, completely blocking us in. The driver killed the engine and the headlights, plunging the driveway into near total darkness, illuminated only by the faint glow of a distant streetlight. The celebratory mood in our car vanished in an instant, replaced by a thick, terrified silence. "What the hell?" Kevin whispered, his eyes wide in the rearview mirror. We were all frozen, staring at the dark, silent vehicle that had us trapped. We could not make out the driver clearly, just the large, imposing silhouette of a heavyset man sitting behind the wheel. He was not getting out. He was not doing anything. He was just sitting there, in the dark, watching us. The seconds ticked by, each one feeling like a lifetime. What did he want? Was this a carjacking? A robbery? Something worse? The not knowing was the most terrifying part. My friends in the back seat started to panic, their whispers a frantic, scared buzz. "What do we do? Should we call the police?" Then, my friend Mark, who was never one to be a passive victim, started to move. "Pop the trunk," he hissed at Kevin. "There is a tire iron in there." The thought of confronting this person was terrifying, but the thought of just sitting there, waiting for him to make the first move, was even worse. Just as Mark was about to get out of the car, the man in the Ford Escape seemed to make a decision. The engine roared back to life, the headlights flashed on, momentarily blinding us, and then he put the car in reverse and sped backwards out of the driveway, his tires squealing on the cold pavement. He was gone as quickly as he had appeared. We all sat there for a moment, stunned, our hearts hammering in our chests. We figured he must have seen the movement in the back seat, heard our voices, and realized that he was not dealing with a single, isolated person. He must have seen Kevin's SUV full of people and realized he had miscalculated, that this was not the easy target he had been looking for. I said a hasty, shaken goodbye to my friends, and Kevin waited in the driveway, his high beams illuminating my entire front yard, until I was safely inside my house with the door locked. I spent the next hour peering out of my windows, my heart leaping at every passing car, convinced that the man in the blue Ford Escape was going to come back. He never did, but the happy, celebratory feeling of New Year's was gone, replaced by a chilling, lingering fear. I do not know what his intentions were that night, but I am profoundly grateful that I was not alone. The simple fact that I was with my friends, that we were a group, had turned us from a target into a threat, and it probably saved my life. My Aunt Carol is one of those people who seems to have been born in the wrong era. She is a kind, no-nonsense woman who, even now in her 60s, has a certain old-fashioned toughness about her. This story she told me happened back in 2008, in the small Wisconsin town where she has lived her entire life. It was a place where people left their doors unlocked and everyone knew their neighbors. Carol was an avid bowler, part of a weekly league that met every Tuesday night at the town's only bowling alley. It was her one night out, a social ritual she cherished. Her husband, my Uncle Mike, usually dropped her off and picked her up, but on this particular night, he had been called in to work an emergency overtime shift at the local paper mill. The walk home was only about 15 minutes, a straight shot down the town's main street. It was a path she had walked hundreds of times, and she did not think twice about it. When her friends from the league offered her a ride, she politely declined, saying the crisp autumn air would do her good. So, just after 10 o'clock, she said her goodbyes, left her bowling ball with a friend to bring next week, and started her walk home. The bowling alley was at the edge of town, where the streetlights became fewer and the neat houses started to give way to darker, more wooded lots. The walk started pleasantly enough. The air was cool, the moon was bright, and the street was quiet and peaceful. She was about halfway home when she saw a man up ahead. He was standing next to a parked car, and in the dim light, it looked like he was trying to pry the door open. Carol's first instinct was to avoid trouble. She crossed to the other side of the street, keeping her head down, hoping he would not notice her, but he did. The moment she stepped off the curb, he stopped what he was doing. She heard a sharp, metallic clang, like a tool being dropped on the pavement. Then, she heard the sound of him running, his footsteps pounding across the asphalt, coming directly at her. Before she could react, he was right behind her, so close she could hear his ragged, heavy breathing next to her ear. She was frozen with a mix of fear and uncertainty. Should she scream? Confront him? Before she could decide, she felt a hand rest on her shoulder. It was not a rough grab, but a gentle, almost casual touch that was somehow even more terrifying. She turned around. The man was panting slightly, but he had a huge, unnervingly friendly smile on his face. "Hello," he said, his voice a little too loud in the quiet night. "Where are you off to in such a hurry?" Carol was a good judge of character, and every alarm bell in her head was screaming. There was something off about his eyes, a wild, unfocused look that made her deeply uncomfortable. She managed a weak, polite smile. "I'm just on my way to a friend's house," she lied, her voice surprisingly steady. His smile widened. "Can I come too?" he asked, his tone making it sound like the most reasonable request in the world. I could really use a friend tonight. Carol was trapped. Her mind raced through the possibilities. She could be rude, tell him to get lost, and risk angering this clearly unstable man. Or she could play along, be nice, and hope for a chance to get away. She chose the latter. "Of course," she said, the words feeling like poison in her mouth. The man's smile seemed to stretch even wider. He put his hand back on her shoulder, and this time it stayed there, a heavy, proprietary weight. They started walking. He was a big man, much larger than her, and she felt completely powerless as he steered her down the street. Her own house was only 5 minutes away, on this very road. She could not lead him there. She had to find a way to lose him. She decided to walk right past her street, her heart pounding with every step. "So, how much further is it?" the man asked, his thumb starting to rub little circles on her shoulder. "Just up here," she said, her voice tight. She randomly pointed to a dark house a few doors down. "This is it. This is my friend's house." It was a desperate gamble. The house was completely dark. Not a single light was on. She walked up the front path with him right beside her and knocked on the door. They waited in an agonizing silence. Of course, there was no answer. "Looks like nobody's home," the man said, a hint of amusement in his voice. Carol tried to act surprised, a frantic performance of false realization. "Oh my goodness, what day is it?" she asked, turning to him. "It is Tuesday," he replied, watching her closely. "Oh, Tuesday. I am so sorry, I completely forgot. They always go out on Tuesdays," she said, forcing a laugh. "Well, that was silly of me. I guess I had better be getting home. It was nice meeting you." She turned and started walking quickly back the way they came, praying he would just let her go. He did not. He caught up to her in 3 long strides. "That is all right," he said, his voice losing its friendly edge. "Why do we not just go back to your place and hang out?" His hand snaked from her shoulder down to her waist. That was it. The last shred of her composure snapped. "Do not touch me," she said, slapping his hand away. The man's face transformed in an instant. The creepy smile vanished, replaced by a look of pure, cold rage. She was in real danger. In a moment of sheer panic and inspiration, she loosened her grip on her purse and let it fall, spilling its contents all over the sidewalk. A lipstick tube went rolling down the slight incline of the pavement. "Oh, goodness," she exclaimed, feigning clumsiness. She looked at him, forcing a helpless damsel in distress smile. "Oh, darling, would you be a dear and get that for me?" He hesitated for a second, his angry expression softening slightly with confusion. He looked at the rolling lipstick, then back at her. For a moment, she thought it would not work, but then he turned his back to her and took a few steps to bend down and retrieve the lipstick. The second his back was turned, Carol was running. She abandoned her purse and its contents and sprinted for her life, her sensible shoes pounding against the pavement. She did not dare look back, but she did not need to. She could hear him. After a moment of shocked silence, she heard him curse loudly, and then the heavy, furious pounding of his footsteps began, chasing her through the dark, quiet streets. She ran until her lungs were on fire, taking random turns, trying to get away, but she could always hear him behind her, relentless. She saw a thick, overgrown hedge in a neighbor's front yard and, without a second thought, she dove into it, ignoring the sharp branches that scratched her face and arms. She crouched in the darkness, her hand clamped over her mouth to stifle her ragged breaths. A few seconds later, she saw him run past, a large, dark shape moving with terrifying speed, completely oblivious to her hiding spot. He kept going, disappearing around the next corner. She stayed hidden in those bushes for what felt like an hour, every rustle of leaves, every distant dog bark, sending a fresh wave of terror through her. Finally, when the silence felt absolute, she crept out and made her way home, staying in the shadows, constantly looking over her shoulder. She finally reached her front porch. As she was fumbling for her spare key, a movement at the far end of the street caught her eye. Her heart dropped into her stomach. It was him. He was standing under a streetlight, watching her house. He had figured it out. He saw her, and he started running again, faster than before, a direct, terrifying sprint towards her. In a cliché moment of pure horror, she dropped her keys. Her hands were shaking so violently she could barely pick them up. She got the key in the lock just as he was reaching the bottom of her porch steps. She threw herself inside, slammed the door, and fumbled with the deadbolt just as he crashed against it. He started banging on the door with his fists, screaming incomprehensible, angry words. Carol, trembling and sobbing, ran to the phone and dialed 911. The police station was not far, and within 3 minutes, the sound of sirens filled the night. The banging stopped. She heard him start to run again, but it was too late. The police caught him a block away. It turned out he had just been released from prison 2 weeks earlier for assault. In that short time, he had already been linked to a local robbery. And he had a crowbar on him, the source of the metallic clang she had heard when he dropped it to chase her. After that night, Carol never walked home alone again. And that story has always stuck with me, a chilling reminder that even in the safest of towns, true darkness can be just a few steps behind you. At 20 years old, I considered myself a true New Yorker. I was a student at Wagner College on Staten Island, and I navigated the city's chaotic energy with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. In the fall of 2023, I was obsessed with film and would often take the ferry into Manhattan by myself for special screenings. One Tuesday night, I went to see a restored print of an old classic at the IFC Center. The movie was incredible, and I was in a great mood as I made my way to the Chambers Street station to catch the one train back to South Ferry. The station was mostly deserted at that hour, and the air was thick with that uniquely New York subway smell of stale air and hot metal. While I was waiting on the platform, a man approached me. He was older, maybe in his mid-30s, with a nervous, fidgety energy. "What is your name?" he asked, his eyes darting around. I immediately went on high alert. "Sophia," I lied, choosing a name that sounded nothing like my own. I started to walk away from him, towards the other end of the platform. He followed me. "My name is Chris," he said, keeping pace with me. "Do you want some candy?" He held out a crumpled bag of gummy bears. The offer was so childishly out of place that it was deeply unsettling. "No, thank you," I said, my voice clipped. I just wanted the train to come. The digital sign said it was 4 minutes away, which felt like an eternity. He continued to ask me questions, where I was from, where I went to school. I lied about everything, creating a fictional version of myself who lived in Brooklyn and studied art at Pratt. Near us on the platform was another woman, and I noticed she kept glancing over, a worried look on her face. Seeing an opportunity, I walked over and sat on the bench next to her. "Please," I whispered, "can you pretend you know me? This guy is creeping me out." She did not hesitate. "I was just about to come over to you," she whispered back. "He was giving me a bad feeling." The train finally screeched into the station. I was so grateful to the woman that I decided to just wait for the next one, to let him go on his way. But as the doors were about to close, Chris tapped me on the shoulder. "Sophia," he said, a strange little smile on his face. "The train is here." My blood ran cold. He knew I had lied about waiting for a friend. The woman I had spoken to gave me a panicked look. I had no choice. I thanked her and I got on the train, Chris following right behind me. When I got off at South Ferry, I did not feel safe. The terminal was crowded, but I felt incredibly alone. I saw a sweet-looking couple, probably in their 50s, and in a moment of sheer desperation, I went up to them and explained my situation. They immediately took me under their wing, offering to sit with me on the ferry. We found seats on the main deck, and I sat between them, a human shield of kindness. But the relief was short-lived. As soon as we sat down, I saw him, Chris. He was walking back and forth in the aisle, a slow, predatory patrol. He would walk past our row, turn, and walk back, his eyes fixed on me the entire time. "That is him," I whispered to the couple, my voice trembling. I felt tears welling up in my eyes. The woman put a comforting arm around me, and the man said, "Do not worry, I know martial arts." It was a slightly absurd thing to say, but in that moment, it was the most reassuring thing I had ever heard. For the entire 25-minute journey, Chris continued his silent, menacing patrol. It was a form of psychological torture. He never said a word, but his presence was a constant, screaming threat. When the ferry docked at St. George Terminal, I thought we might finally lose him in the crowd of people disembarking. The couple stayed close to me, flanking me as we walked. But as we were heading towards the bus terminal, Chris materialized right beside me. He leaned in close and whispered in my ear, "I hope to see you again, Sophia." I flinched back as if I had been struck. The husband from the couple I was with saw it. He stepped between us, his body language shifting from protective to confrontational. "You need to stay away from her," he said, his voice low and firm. "If I see you near her again, I am calling the police." Chris just gave him a smug, defiant look, then turned and disappeared into the crowd. The couple was taking the same bus as me, and they insisted on sitting with me. They gave me their phone numbers and made me promise to call them the second I got back to my dorm. When I got off the bus at the campus stop, I asked the security guard at the gate to drive me directly to my dorm building. I did not feel safe walking the few hundred yards across campus. The experience left a deep and lasting scar. The city I loved, the city I thought I owned, suddenly felt like a dangerous place full of strangers whose intentions I could never truly know. And I will never forget the chilling sound of a man whispering my fake name, a promise and a threat all in one. At 19, in the fall of 2022, my life was a study in routine. I was a student at a sprawling community college in San Antonio, a place that felt more like a commuter hub than a traditional campus. My days were a predictable loop. Wake up, take the city bus to campus, attend classes, find a quiet corner in the library's computer lab to do my homework, and then take the bus home. I was a quiet person, an observer by nature, and I found a strange comfort in the anonymity of my daily commute. I was just another face in the crowd, and that was exactly how I liked it. I first noticed him on the bus. For about a week, he was just part of the background, a guy with messy hair and a perpetually tired expression, who got on a few stops after me and got off at the college. I did not think anything of him until the staring started. It was not subtle. He would sit across the aisle and just watch me, his gaze so intense and unwavering that I could feel it burning into the side of my face. I would try to ignore it, burying my nose in a textbook, but the feeling of being under a microscope was impossible to shake. One afternoon, I was in the computer lab, deep in concentration, trying to finish a research paper. The lab was my sanctuary, a place of quiet, focused energy. Suddenly, I felt a presence beside me. I looked up, and he was there, pulling up a chair and sitting down right next to me, invading my personal space. "Hey," he said, a goofy, confident smile on his face as he leaned in to look at my screen. "What you working on?" I was so stunned by his audacity that I could not speak for a moment. Who are you?" I finally managed to ask. "I am Jack," he said, his smile widening. "I see you on the bus all the time. I think you are really pretty, so I thought I would come say hi." My entire body tensed up. The quiet sanctuary of the lab suddenly felt like a trap. Thanks," I stammered, already starting to close my documents and pack up my things. "I have to get to class now." It was a lie, but it was the only excuse I could think of. I practically fled from the lab, my heart pounding. I took a long roundabout route to the bus stop, just in case he was following me. He was. I saw him trailing about 50 feet behind, but he turned and walked away when he realized I had spotted him. After that day, the stalking escalated. He had figured out my schedule. When my last class of the day ended, he would be there, waiting for me by the bus stop. Every single day. He would try to talk to me, repeating the same creepy compliments, his presence a constant, unwanted shadow on my routine. I started to dread the end of the day, the walk to the bus stop filling me with a sick, anxious feeling. I was a regular on that bus route, and I had developed a friendly, nodding acquaintance with the bus driver, a kind, middle-aged woman named Maria. After a week of Jack's relentless harassment, I was at my breaking point. One afternoon, as I was getting on the bus, with him right behind me as usual, I leaned in close to Maria. "That guy behind me," I whispered, my voice shaking. "He has been following me every day. He really creeps me out." Maria's friendly expression hardened in an instant. She gave me a reassuring nod. She waited for me to sit down, and then, just as Jack was about to step onto the bus, she closed the doors with a decisive hiss and pulled away from the curb, leaving him standing there, his face a mask of pure shock and fury. I felt a wave of relief so intense it almost made me cry. I thought that might be the end of it, but I was wrong. The next day, my best friend, who was in one of Jack's classes, came up to me with a worried look on her face. "You are not going to believe this," she said. "That guy Jack, he spent the entire class bragging to his friends about how he was going to get with the hot chick from the bus. He was talking about you." A hot, furious anger replaced my fear. The next afternoon, when he was waiting for me at the bus stop, I did not try to ignore him. I walked right up to him. "In your dreams, you creep," I said, my voice low and shaking with rage. "I am not your chick, and you are not getting laid. You are a pathetic stalker." He looked genuinely shocked, and then he tried to turn on the charm. "Whoa, baby, I am sorry," he said, trying to put his arm around me. "I will not do it again." "I am not your baby," I spat, pushing his arm away. "Now leave me the hell alone, or I am calling campus security. I am serious." My voice had risen, and I had not realized that one of my professors, a sharp, no-nonsense woman, was standing nearby. She had overheard the entire exchange. She walked over, her eyes like chips of ice. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, looking from my furious face to Jack's suddenly terrified one. She took him aside and had a very quiet, very intense conversation with him. I do not know what she said, but it worked. He never came near me again. He started taking a different bus. My routine was my own again, but it was tainted by the memory of his stare, a chilling reminder that anonymity is a fragile thing, and a sanctuary can become a hunting ground in an instant. I was 21 in 2023, and my life was a mess. I was living in a small, damp flat in a less than glamorous part of Manchester, and I had just gone through a truly awful breakup with a guy who had specialized in making me feel small and stupid. In the aftermath, I was trying to rebuild my social life from scratch, which meant saying yes to invitations I probably should have ignored. That is how I ended up going out one Saturday night with a group of people I knew from my weekend job at a coffee shop. They were not really friends, more like acquaintances. People I shared polite, superficial conversations with over the steam of the espresso machine. But I was lonely and desperate for a sense of normalcy. So when they invited me to a club in the city centre, I eagerly agreed. The night itself was a blur of loud music, overpriced drinks, and forced fun. I drank too much, too fast, trying to quiet the anxious voice in my head and numb the persistent ache of the breakup. The people I was with were nice enough, but we had nothing in common besides our shared employer. As the night wore on, our little group started to splinter. By the time the club's lights came on around 4 in the morning, signaling the end of the night, I was completely alone. My so-called friends had disappeared without a word, leaving me stranded in the cold, deserted heart of the city. I stumbled out of the club and onto the street. The chaotic energy of a few hours earlier had vanished, replaced by an eerie, pre-dawn silence. The street was empty, except for a few pieces of discarded takeaway wrappers skittering across the pavement in the wind. I was drunk, disoriented, and a deep, lonely chill had settled into my bones. I fumbled in my purse for my wallet, hoping to find enough cash for a taxi, but all I found was my bank card. I had spent my last few pounds on that final drink. I tried to call a taxi service, but the line was busy. I tried to call my now ex-boyfriend out of a stupid, drunken impulse, but his number was blocked. I was well and truly stuck. I was leaning against the cold brick wall of the closed nightclub, trying to figure out what to do, when he appeared. It was like he materialized out of the shadows. One moment I was alone, and the next, he was just there, standing a few feet away. He was tall, much taller than me, and had a kind of false, slick charm about him. He was not remotely drunk. His eyes were sharp and focused, and he was watching me with an intensity that immediately set my teeth on edge. "You look like you were having a rough night," he said, his voice smooth and practiced. He struck up a conversation, asking me what was wrong, where my friends were. He was so familiar, so comfortable. It was like he had known me for years. I was clearly drunk and vulnerable, a fact that he seemed to have noticed and catalogued in an instant. I tried to be vague, muttering something about my friends leaving, but he was relentless, pushing for details, for my name. When I would not give it to him, he did something that still makes my skin crawl. He noticed me fumbling with my phone and said, "Here, why don't you add me on Facebook?" Before I could react, he had gently but firmly taken the phone from my hands. My drunk, clumsy fingers had failed to lock it. With a few quick taps, he had opened my app, found his own profile, and sent himself a friend request. Then he handed my phone back to me with a triumphant smile. Now he had my full name. Now he knew who I was. A new, sharper kind of fear cut through the alcoholic haze. "I have to go," I said, my voice shaking. "I need to get home." But he would not let me leave. He just kept talking, moving closer, his friendliness feeling more and more like a mask that could slip at any moment. I was sizing up the situation, my mind racing. The street was completely deserted. He was well over 6 feet tall, and I am barely 5'2". He could overpower me in a second. Running was not an option. I was wearing ridiculously high heels, and my head was spinning. My only chance was to play along, to stay calm and friendly, and pray for an opportunity to escape. He kept me talking for what felt like an hour, though it was probably only 10 minutes. I kept repeating that I needed to get home, my voice a broken record of polite desperation. I do not know what shifted, but suddenly there was an opening. He was distracted for a split second by a notification on his own phone. It was all I needed. I said, "Well, it was really nice meeting you," in the most cheerful, casual voice I could manage, and I just started walking away, calmly, as if I were just strolling around the corner to meet someone. I did not run. I did not look back. I just walked. The moment I turned the corner and was out of his sight, I ran. I kicked off my stupid, painful heels and ran barefoot on the cold, gritty pavement. I did not care about the broken glass or the grime. I just ran. Hot tears were streaming down my face, a mixture of fear and relief. I was so focused on getting away that I did not see the two people in front of me until I literally ran straight into them. It was a young couple, probably on their way home from a night shift. They immediately saw the state I was in. My bare feet, my tear-streaked face, my whole body trembling with terror. "What is wrong?" the woman asked, her voice full of a kindness that made me sob even harder. I managed to choke out what had happened. The man told me to stay with his girlfriend while he went back around the corner to make sure the creepy guy was really gone. He came back a minute later and said the street was empty. They gave me a bottle of water, and the woman draped her jacket over my shivering shoulders. They walked me all the way to my front door and waited until I was safely inside. The first thing I did was grab my phone, deny the friend request from that man, and block his profile. I finally got through to one of the friends I'd been out with, and she came over and stayed with me for the rest of the night. I do not know what that man was planning. Maybe he was just a creep hoping to get lucky who gave up when he realized I was not interested. Or maybe he had something much darker in mind. I will never know. But I do know that I have never walked home alone at night since, and I will never forget the feeling of his feigned friendliness, a terrifying mask for the predator that was hiding just underneath. In the summer of 2023, I was living in a small, sun-baked town in the Andalusia region of Spain, attending a language immersion program. My mother, who was supposed to have come with me, had to cancel at the last minute due to a work emergency, so I found myself unexpectedly alone in a small rented house on a quiet cobblestone street. That night, the town was celebrating a local festival. The air was filled with the sound of music, the smell of grilled food, and the happy chatter of people celebrating in the main plaza. I went to a party at the house of another student, a girl from my class named Sophia. We drank cheap wine, practiced our clumsy Spanish with the locals, and had a wonderful, carefree time. It was well past midnight when Sophia and I decided to head home. The party was starting to wind down, and we were both tired. Our houses were in the same direction, a 15-minute walk through the town's sleeping streets. The town was not dangerous, but at that hour, it was completely deserted. We were talking and laughing quietly, our footsteps echoing on the ancient stones. As we turned a corner onto a long, narrow street lined with dark, shuttered storefronts, I saw her for the first time. It was just a fleeting glimpse of a reflection in a dark shop window, a tall figure, completely covered in dark clothing, standing in a doorway about 100 feet behind us. I dismissed it as a trick of the light and did not say anything to Sophia. A few minutes later, I felt that unmistakable, primal feeling of being watched. I glanced over my shoulder and my heart lurched. The figure was still there, closer now. It was a woman, completely covered from head to toe in a black flowing garment that left only her eyes visible. In the dim glow of the old-fashioned streetlights, her eyes seemed to glitter with a strange, unnerving intensity. She was not just walking down the street, she was following us. I grabbed Sophia's arm and whispered, "Do not look now, but I think that woman is following us." We started walking faster, our light-hearted mood completely evaporated, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. We risked another look back. The woman had matched our pace, her dark form moving with a silent, fluid grace that was deeply unsettling. She saw us look, and she ducked quickly into a dark alcove, but she was not fast enough. We had both seen her. Panic started to set in. My house was the closer of the two, and we decided to go there together for a sleepover. We were practically running by the time we reached my street. I fumbled in my purse for my keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grasp them. As I was jamming the key into the lock of the heavy, old wooden door, Sophia let out a blood-curdling scream. "There she is!" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger down the street. The woman was standing at the corner watching us, her form a terrifying silhouette against the faint light of the plaza. Sophia pushed me through the door, and we tumbled inside, slamming and bolting it behind us. We leaned against the door, our hearts hammering in our chests, gasping for air. We thought we were safe. We were wrong. After a few minutes of terrified silence, we heard a sound from the back of the house. A scraping noise coming from the kitchen. The kitchen had a large, old-fashioned casement window that looked out onto a small walled-in garden. It was a heavy window with a rusty, difficult latch. It should have been impossible to open from the outside. Sophia started to dial the police while I crept towards the kitchen, my mind a blank slate of pure terror. I grabbed the heaviest, sharpest kitchen knife I could find from the butcher block on the counter. I hid myself behind the tall, antique refrigerator, my body pressed into the cold, dark space between it and the wall. I peeked around the edge just in time to see the window swing inwards with a low groan. And then, a dark, shrouded leg came through the opening, followed by the rest of her body. She dropped to the kitchen floor with a soft thud and stood up, her dark eyes scanning the room. I have never been so scared in my entire life. I thought I was going to be sick. My entire body was trembling, but my hand was steady on the knife. In that moment, a surge of pure, desperate adrenaline coursed through me. I was not going to let this person hurt us. I stepped out from behind the refrigerator, holding the knife out in front of me, and I screamed as loud as I possibly could. "Get the hell out of my house!" My voice was a raw, guttural roar that I did not recognize as my own. The woman shrieked, a high-pitched, terrified sound that was completely at odds with her menacing presence. She seemed as surprised and scared as I was. She scrambled back towards the window, clumsily hoisting herself up and through it, and disappeared into the darkness of the garden. The police arrived a few minutes later, but she was long gone. They found no one in the garden, no one in the surrounding streets. Because she had worn gloves, there were no fingerprints. There was nothing they could do. After my mum came home, we installed a modern alarm system and new locks on all the windows. But the feeling of safety in that little house was gone forever. Sophia and I spent weeks going over that night, trying to understand. Was the woman on drugs? Was she mentally ill? Or was it something more sinister? We will never know what she wanted, or what would have happened if I had not found the courage to scream. But I will never forget the sight of her dark form slipping through my kitchen window, a silent, terrifying intruder in the night. I was 14 years old in the autumn of 2023, and my life was a carefully constructed schedule of school, extracurriculars, and the long bus ride home across Denver. The bus was my sanctuary, a moving bubble of anonymity where I could put in my earbuds, lean my head against the cool glass, and just watch the city slide by. I was on the debate team, and practices always ran late, so by the time I was heading home, the sun was already setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple over the distant silhouette of the mountains. One Tuesday afternoon, I was completely exhausted. We had been running drills for an upcoming tournament, and my brain felt like a wrung-out sponge. I got on the bus, found my usual seat in the back, and was asleep before we had even left the downtown core. I woke up with a jolt about 30 minutes later, the familiar chime announcing my stop just a few blocks away. The bus was mostly empty now, populated only by a few other tired commuters and the strange artificial twilight of the interior lights. As I gathered my things, I noticed a man sitting a few rows ahead of me, watching me in the reflection of the dark window. He was probably in his late 20s, with a thin, angular face and eyes that seemed too wide, too intense. I told myself I was imagining things, that he was just zoned out, but the feeling of being watched was a cold, unpleasant prickle on my skin. I got off the bus and started my walk home. The air was crisp and smelled of dry leaves. My neighborhood was quiet and residential, a place of neat lawns and sleeping houses, and the walk was usually a peaceful transition from the chaos of the city to the calm of home. I had walked about a block when I heard footsteps behind me, falling into a steady, unhurried rhythm that seemed to be deliberately matching my own. I did not dare to look back. I just walked a little faster, my heart starting to beat a frantic, panicked rhythm against my ribs. "Hey!" a voice called out, and I knew instantly it was the man from the bus. "Hey, you are beautiful." I ignored him, my eyes fixed on the comforting glow of a streetlight 100 feet ahead. I kept walking, my backpack suddenly feeling impossibly heavy. "How old are you?" he continued, his voice closer now. "You are so pretty. Let me talk to you." I kept my mouth shut and my pace quick, but he was persistent, following me as I crossed the street. We walked past a small community park where a late-season farmer's market was just starting to pack up for the evening. There were a few vendors left, dismantling their stalls under the dim park lights. I saw a woman with kind eyes and a warm, colorful scarf wrapping up bundles of dried flowers. In a moment of pure, desperate instinct, I broke from my path and walked directly to her stall. "Hi," I said, my voice coming out as a shaky whisper. "Can you help me? That man, he has been following me since the bus." The woman looked from my pale, terrified face to the man who had stopped about 20 feet away, a look of annoyed impatience on his face. He was trying to act casual, pretending to look at his phone, but his eyes kept flicking back to me. The woman did not hesitate. Her kind face hardened into a mask of protective fury. She was one of those women who seemed to possess an innate, unshakable strength. "You stay right here with me, sweetie," she said, her voice a low, firm command. Then she looked directly at the man and yelled, her voice echoing through the quiet park. "Hey, you, get the hell away from her." The man looked up, startled by the direct confrontation. He gave her a dirty look, muttered something under his breath, and then, to my immense relief, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the growing darkness. The flower vendor stayed with me for another 10 minutes, chatting about the different kinds of lavender she grew. Her calm, steady presence a balm to my frayed nerves. She did not let me leave until she was sure he was really gone. I thanked her profusely, bought a small bundle of flowers with the last of my cash, and started the rest of the walk home, my body still trembling with leftover adrenaline. I was almost at my front door when I saw him again. He was standing across the street, partially hidden in the deep shadow of a large spruce tree. He had not left. He had circled around and had been waiting for me. My blood ran cold. He saw me see him, and he started to walk across the street, a slow, deliberate pace that was filled with menace. I did not wait. I ran. I sprinted up my driveway, fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking so violently I could barely fit the key in the lock. I burst inside and slammed the door, throwing the deadbolt just as I heard his footsteps on my front porch. I stood there, in the dark entryway, my back pressed against the door, listening to the sound of my own ragged breathing, clutching a bundle of lavender that suddenly felt like the only sane thing in a world that had just shown me its terrifying, predatory side. I never took that bus route home again. In the brutally cold January of 2023, I was 16 and my entire world revolved around a pair of snow boots. They were sorrel boots, the kind I had been lusting after for months, with thick waterproof leather and a cozy faux fur lining. I had seen them in a catalogue and had become completely obsessed. I worked every weekend at a local diner, saving up my tips, and the day I finally had enough money to buy them was one of the proudest moments of my life. They were more than just boots. They were a symbol of my hard work and my first real taste of financial independence. My best friend Jenna lived directly across the street from me in our quiet, snowy Minneapolis suburb. Our houses were so close that we could signal to each other from our bedroom windows. That night, I could not wait to show her my new prize. I put on the boots, their newness making them feel stiff and important, and crunched across the snow-covered street to her house. We spent a few hours just hanging out in her basement, watching a movie and talking about school. Around 10:30, I decided to head home. It was a Tuesday, a school night, and it was also trash night. I said goodbye to Jenna and walked back across the street. The night was cold, clear, and incredibly quiet. The snow muffled all sound, creating a feeling of peaceful isolation. I went inside my house, grabbed the full kitchen garbage bag, and went out through the garage to take it to the curb. As I was walking down the driveway, I heard a crunching sound in the snow over by the side of my yard, near the large pine trees that bordered our property. I paused, listening. It was probably just a deer or a raccoon. I dismissed it and went back into the garage for the recycling bin. When I came back out and placed the bin at the end of the driveway, a man stepped out from the deep shadows of the pine trees. He was right there, suddenly, as if he had materialized out of the cold air. I gasped, stumbling back a step. He was older, maybe in his 40s, and he looked rough. He was wearing a thin jacket that was not nearly warm enough for the weather, and I could smell the faint, sweet scent of stale alcohol on the frigid air. "Excuse me?" he said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. "I am a little lost. Can you tell me how to get to Elm Street?" Elm Street was a few blocks away. Relieved that he just seemed to be a lost and slightly drunk person, I gave him the directions. He nodded, a strange, unfocused look in his eyes. He took a step closer, and then he leaned in, his face so close to mine I could feel the warmth of his breath, and he whispered, "I am going to do things to you." The words did not even register at first. They were so monstrous, so completely out of place in my quiet suburban world that my brain could not process them. And then the meaning hit me, and a wave of pure, cold terror, unlike anything I had ever felt before, washed over me. I turned and ran. I ran for the open garage door, for the safety of my home. But my brand new boots, the boots I had been so proud of, were stiff and clumsy. My feet felt like they were encased in concrete. I tripped on the lip of the garage floor and went sprawling onto the cold, oil-stained concrete. I scrambled to get up, my hands slipping on the smooth surface. He was right behind me. I could hear his heavy, ragged breathing. I managed to get to my feet and threw myself at the interior door that led into the house. I got inside and slammed it shut, fumbling with the deadbolt just as he started to pound on the other side. I ran upstairs, screaming for my mum. She came out of her room, her face a mask of confusion and alarm. I managed to choke out what had happened. While my mum called 911, I stood at the top of the stairs, trembling, listening. I could hear him in the garage. I heard the sound of him rummaging through my dad's toolbox, the metallic clatter of tools being knocked over. Was he looking for a way to break down the door? Was he looking for a weapon? The thought made me feel physically ill. Then, my mum came back with a heavy fireplace poker in her hand and cautiously opened the interior door. The garage was empty. He was gone. The police came, but they could not find him. A week later, I was on the city bus coming home from a friend's house. I looked up, and he was there, sitting a few rows ahead of me. My heart stopped. It was him. There was no doubt. He turned his head and his eyes swept over me, but there was no spark of recognition. To him, I was just another anonymous teenager on a bus. I got off at my stop, my legs feeling like jelly. I called Jenna, my voice a panicked whisper, and asked her to meet me at the corner. We called the police again, but by the time they arrived, he had disappeared. That night, I took my beautiful, expensive new snow boots, the boots I had worked so hard for, and I put them in a garbage bag. I could not wear them anymore. Every time I looked at them, all I could feel was the cold concrete of the garage floor on my hands, and the terrifying sound of his breathing right behind me. They were not a symbol of my independence anymore. They were a symbol of my terror. I threw them in the trash, and I watched the garbage truck take them away on Tuesday morning, hoping it could take the memory away with them. It could not. My entire world at 16 was contained within a single, curving block in Queens. At one end of the block was my house, and near the other end was the house of my best friend, Maria. Our Friday night ritual was sacred. A group of us would pile into Maria's basement, watch movies, eat junk food, and just enjoy the simple, uncomplicated freedom of being teenagers. My walk home was usually the final, peaceful act of the night. It was a walk I had taken 1,000 times, so familiar I could have done it with my eyes closed. Usually, one of the guys from our group who lived a few blocks further away would walk with me, but on this particular Friday night in the fall of 2023, he had to leave early. It was a little after 9 o'clock when I decided to head home. The air was cool and smelled of damp leaves and distant car exhaust. Before I left Maria's house, I gave my mum a quick call, a standard procedure. "Hey, Mum, I am leaving Maria's now. I will be home in 2 minutes." It was a call I made out of habit, not out of any real sense of danger. As I stepped out of Maria's house, I noticed a group of guys hanging out on the corner, under a flickering streetlight. They were older, probably in their early 20s, and they were not from our neighborhood. I could tell by the way they carried themselves, a kind of aggressive, swaggering confidence that was out of place on our quiet residential street. I did not think much of it and started my walk home, keeping my head down and my pace brisk. I had only made it a few houses down when I felt it, the unmistakable, creepy feeling of being watched. I risked a quick glance over my shoulder. They were still on the corner, but they were all looking at me. Then, 2 of them broke away from the group and started walking in my direction. My heart started to beat a little faster. I told myself to stay calm, that it was a public street, that I was almost home. They fell into step behind me, and the catcalls started. They were quiet at first, low, lewd whispers that I tried to ignore. Then, the rest of the group started to follow. Their footsteps a menacing, echoing chorus on the quiet street. They were surrounding me, forming a slow-moving, tightening circle. I could smell the stale cigarette smoke and cheap beer on them. They were getting closer, their voices getting louder, more aggressive. I was completely trapped. My house was just a few hundred feet away, its warm, welcoming lights visible at the curve of the street, but it felt like it was on another planet. I was so scared I could not even scream. My throat had closed up, and a cold, paralyzing fear had taken over my entire body. Just as one of them reached out to grab my arm, I heard it. A scream. It was my mum. "Get away from her," she shrieked, her voice cutting through the night with a power and ferocity I had never heard before. The men all froze, startled, looking up towards the lighted window of my house. Then my front door burst open and my dad came running out. He is not a big man, but in that moment, he looked like a giant, his face a mask of pure, protective rage. He did not yell, he did not threaten, he just ran and put himself between me and them. "Go inside," he said to me, his voice a low, steady command. "Now." I did not have to be told twice. I ran for the safety of my front porch. The group of men, their bravado shattered by the sudden appearance of an angry father, started to back away. They were cowards, but they were also angry that their fun had been ruined. As they were running off, one of them grabbed the heavy metal lid off a neighbor's garbage can and threw it like a frisbee. It sailed through the air and crashed into the side of our family's minivan, which was parked in the driveway, leaving a deep, ugly dent in the passenger door. Inside, my mum was on the phone with the police, and my dad was holding me, my whole body shaking uncontrollably. My mum later told me that after I had called, she just had a bad feeling. She could not explain it. She went to the window to watch for me, and she saw the whole thing unfold. That dent in the van stayed there for years, a constant physical reminder of that night, a monument to a mother's intuition, a father's courage, and the terrifying truth that sometimes the most dangerous places are the ones just a few steps from your own front door. My semester abroad in Paris was supposed to be a dream. I was 20 years old in the spring of 2024, a junior in college, and I had saved up for years to live in a tiny, charming apartment in the 11th arrondissement. I loved the city with a fierce passion. The art, the food, the language, the feeling of history on every street corner. But living in a dream does not make you immune to nightmares. My friends and I had gone out to a club, a loud, vibrant place that stayed open until the sun came up. I left around 5 in the morning, tired, a little drunk, and ready for my own bed. I navigated the metro system to the station for the RER-A train, the line that would take me back to my neighborhood. The platform at that hour was a strange mix of people, fellow late-night revelers like me, their energy finally starting to fade, and the city's early morning workers, their faces weary as they began their day. He tried to talk to me on the platform. He was older, maybe in his mid-30s, with a sharp suit that was slightly rumpled and an air of desperate intensity about him. I gave him a polite but firm "non merci" and moved further down the platform, hoping to get into a different train car. But the train arrived before I could create enough distance, and I ended up in the same car as him. There were only 2 open single seats left, across the aisle from each other. I took one, and to my dismay, he immediately sat down in the other. The moment the doors closed, he started. "Mademoiselle," he said, leaning across the aisle, his voice unpleasantly intimate. "I must tell you, I have just fallen in love. I want to marry you." I was so taken aback I could only stare at him. I tried to laugh it off, assuming it was a bizarre, drunken joke, but he was completely serious. "I do not even want to sleep with you," he continued, his eyes wide and intense. "I just want you to be my wife, my one and only. Please, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" As he was saying this, he reached across the aisle and laid his hand on my thigh, his fingers stroking the fabric of my jeans. A cold, sick feeling washed over me. This was not funny. It was terrifying. I tried to sink down into my seat to make myself smaller. "No," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I am not interested. I have a boyfriend." It was true. My boyfriend, Sam, was back in the States, a fact that suddenly made the world feel impossibly large and lonely. "If you had a boyfriend, he would be here with you now," the man said, his logic twisted and predatory. "He would be taking his future wife home safely. He is not a good man to leave you all alone." he went on, telling me he was a nice guy, that he had a good job, that he could take care of me. I just stared out the window, praying for my stop to arrive. When the train finally pulled into my station, I shot out of my seat. But he was right behind me, following me off the train and onto the platform. He continued his relentless monologue, begging me to come back to his place, asking for my number. The early morning air was cold and I started to shiver, a reaction to both the temperature and the fear. He noticed. "You are cold," he said, and before I could protest, he was shrugging off his suit jacket and forcibly draping it over my shoulders. It was a strangely intimate, possessive gesture, as if he were marking his territory. It smelled of expensive cologne and something faintly sour. "Please, just leave me alone," I begged, but he would not listen. He insisted on walking me home. Just then, I saw a woman standing by the station exit, a middle-aged woman in a nurse's uniform, smoking a cigarette before her shift. She was watching us, her expression a mixture of pity and annoyance. In a moment of desperation, I walked over to her, the man still trailing behind me. I explained the situation in my clumsy, frantic French, and he gave his own version of the story, painting himself as a concerned gentleman trying to help a young woman who was not feeling well. The nurse listened to both of us, her eyes narrowing. She took a long drag from her cigarette and then looked the man dead in the eye. "You are not her boyfriend," she said in sharp, decisive French. "You will not walk her home." "I will." She put a protective arm around me, and the man, finally faced with a force he could not manipulate, seemed to deflate. He muttered something under his breath, snatched his jacket off my shoulders, and stalked away. I was so grateful to the nurse I could have cried. She walked with me for a few blocks until her bus arrived, and I thought the ordeal was finally over. I started the final stretch to my apartment, about a 5-minute walk through quiet residential streets. I was about halfway there when I heard it. A low whistle from behind me. I turned, and my heart plummeted. It was him. He must have circled around and waited for me. He ran to catch up, his face set in a determined, desperate expression. He started again, the same insane proposal, the same pleas for my number. This time, he reached out and cupped my face in his hands, his thumbs stroking my cheeks. Something inside me snapped. I slapped his hands away. "If you do not stop touching me, I will hurt you," I said, my voice low and shaking with rage. He just smiled, as if he found my anger amusing, and reached for me again. "I am calling the police," I threatened, pulling out my phone. That was the magic word. The smile vanished from his face, replaced by a look of genuine fear. He took a step back, held up his hands in a gesture of surrender, and then turned and scurried away into the pre-dawn gloom. I did not wait to see where he went. I ran the rest of the way to my building, burst into my apartment, and collapsed against the locked door, sobbing. The dream of Paris felt, for the first time, like a beautiful, dangerous lie. In the summer of 2024, I was 25 and living my dream life as a graduate student in Montreal. I had a small apartment in the Mile End, a vibrant, artistic neighborhood, and my classes were in the Plateau, an area known for its beautiful architecture and lively atmosphere. The walk between the two was one of the best parts of my day. I would cut through the city's famous ruelles, the charming tree-lined alleyways that form a secret network behind the main streets. These alleys were my sanctuary. They were quiet and peaceful, full of blooming gardens, colorful murals, and the ubiquitous Montreal cats that would laze in the sun. I always felt completely safe there, surrounded by the sounds of people living their lives on the iconic spiral staircases and back balconies that overlooked these hidden paths. One afternoon in July, I left the university around 4 o'clock. The day was beautiful, hot and sunny, and I started my walk home feeling relaxed and happy. I was not listening to music, just daydreaming and enjoying the peaceful atmosphere of the alleys. I walked for about 10 minutes, lost in my own thoughts, completely unaware of my surroundings. That is when I heard it. A faint yelling from a balcony somewhere up ahead and a few stories up. My French was still a work in progress, and I could not make out any specific words. I assumed it was just a couple having an argument or some friends joking around, so I ignored it and kept walking. About 2 minutes later, a man burst out of a back gate just ahead of me, his face etched with a look of urgency. "Excuse me," he said, switching to perfect English when he realized I was not a native French speaker. "There is someone following you." I stopped, completely taken aback. "What?" I said, a nervous laugh escaping my lips. "No, I do not think so. It is probably just someone walking their dog." The idea seemed preposterous. Here, in my safe, happy place, it had to be a mistake. "No," the man insisted, his voice low and serious. "He came into the alley right after you did. My girlfriend and I were watching him from our balcony. He has been ducking behind garages and garbage cans, staying out of your sight." He pointed up to a small balcony on the 3rd floor of a brick building. A woman was standing there, her phone to her ear, watching us with a worried expression. The man turned and yelled something in French down the alleyway, back the way I had come. There was a moment of silence, and then he yelled again, something like, "Get the hell out of here!" Still, nothing happened. He started striding down the alley, his posture tense and angry. And that is when it happened. A man stood up from behind a low brick wall that enclosed a small yard. He had been crouched there, completely hidden from my view. He was thin, with long, scraggly brown hair that hung in his face. He was wearing a heavy black leather jacket, which was bizarre, given that it was nearly 30 degrees Celsius outside. He looked up, and for a split second, his eyes met mine. They were wild and full of a terrifying, burning anger. It was a look of pure malice that went right through me. The moment our eyes met, he took off, running back down the alleyway in the direction I had come from. The balcony Samaritan booked it after him, but the man was fast. He disappeared around a corner and was gone. The man from the balcony came back, out of breath and frustrated. "He is gone," he said. "Are you okay?" I could not speak. My body was trembling with a delayed reaction of shock and fear. The safe, peaceful alley suddenly felt menacing and full of dark corners. We stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. There was not much we could tell the police. A man had been following me, but nothing had actually happened. My rescuer walked me out of the alley system and onto Park Avenue, a busy, noisy main road. The sudden chaos of traffic and pedestrians felt like a protective shield. I thanked him profusely, my voice shaking. He and his girlfriend had very likely saved me from something terrible. But the most terrifying part of the whole experience, the thing that still haunts me, is that I did not sense a single thing was wrong. There was no prickle on the back of my neck, no feeling of being watched, no gut instinct screaming at me that I was in danger. My internal alarm system, the one I had always trusted, had failed me completely. I had been walking through my sanctuary, completely oblivious, a sheep being stalked by a wolf, and if it had not been for two strangers enjoying an afternoon on their balcony, I would have walked right into whatever trap he had been planning for me. The year was 2014, and at 21, I was living in a cheap, shared apartment in a gritty, industrial neighborhood on the edge of Pittsburgh. It was an area of sprawling warehouses, railroad tracks that seemed to hum with a constant energy, and a few scattered businesses that catered to the truckers and factory workers. It was not a place most people would choose to live, but the rent was affordable, and I had a certain romantic appreciation for its raw, urban landscape. I was in a tumultuous, on-again, off-again relationship with my boyfriend, Mark, and our nights often ended in arguments that left me feeling restless and suffocated. One cold Tuesday night in November, we had a particularly bad fight. The details are fuzzy now, but the feeling is not. I felt a desperate, overwhelming need to escape, to breathe air that was not thick with tension. It was well past midnight. The air was sharp and cold, and I did not have a plan. I just threw on my long black coat, a pair of heavy combat boots, and stormed out into the deserted streets. In retrospect, it was a reckless, stupid thing to do. I was a young woman walking alone in a notoriously rough part of the city in the middle of the night. But at that moment, I was not thinking about safety. I was just thinking about putting as much distance as possible between myself and the argument. I walked towards the only landmark I knew in the area, a brightly lit liquor store about half a mile away. The streets were eerily empty. The only sounds were the distant clang of freight trains and the hum of the sodium vapor streetlights that cast a sickly orange glow on the wet pavement. As I got closer to the liquor store, I reached into my coat pocket for my wallet and phone, thinking maybe I would just call a cab and go to a friend's house. My pockets were empty. In my haste to leave, I had forgotten everything. The store was closed anyway. Frustrated and cold, I just kept walking. I was standing under the flickering neon sign of the liquor store when I heard a car slow down behind me. I turned, and a wave of relief washed over me. It was Mark's car, a beat-up, silver 90s Buick LeSabre. I assumed he had come looking for me, that he had cooled down and wanted to apologize. I walked towards the passenger side, ready to get in. But as I got closer, my relief curdled into confusion, and then into pure, cold dread. The man behind the wheel was not Mark. He was a stranger, older, with a thin, unshaven face and dark, hollow-looking eyes. He rolled down the passenger window. "Get in," he said. It was not a question or an invitation. It was a command. His voice was flat, devoid of any emotion. I was completely stunned. "What?" "No," I managed to say, taking a step back from the car. I turned and started walking again, my heart beginning to pound a frantic rhythm against my ribs. He did not drive off. He put the car in drive and began to creep along the curb, keeping perfect pace with me. I said, "Get in the car," he repeated, his voice still unnervously calm. "Go away," I said, my voice shaking. "Leave me alone." I started walking faster. He stayed right beside me, the open passenger window like a dark, gaping mouth. Then, suddenly, he sped off, the Buick's old engine rattling as he disappeared down the street. For a second, I thought it was over. I let out a shaky breath and quickly ducked around a corner, starting to walk back towards my apartment, but on the opposite side of the street this time, facing the oncoming lane. I did not want to be taken by surprise again. It did not take long. A minute later, I saw the Buick's headlights appear at the far end of the street. He had circled the block and was coming back for me. He drove slowly, his eyes locked on me. He would stop, wait for me to walk a few feet, and then creep forward again, all the while muttering things I could not quite hear through the low rumble of his engine. He seemed to have an unshakable conviction that I was eventually going to get into the car with him. My no did not seem to register. I was trapped. The street was completely deserted. If I made a run for my apartment, there was a long, dark underpass beneath the train tracks that I would have to go through. He could easily follow me, corner me, and there would be no one to see or hear anything. My mind raced, searching for an escape. I felt a wave of absolute helplessness wash over me. Just as I was starting to truly panic, I heard something. A muffled, rhythmic sound, and the faint chatter of voices coming from inside an unmarked, windowless brick warehouse beside me. I did not know what it was, but it was a sign of life, my only hope. Without a second thought, I ran to the heavy metal door and pushed. It was unlocked. I burst inside, and the scene that greeted me was so bizarre, so completely unexpected, that it took my brain a moment to process it. The warehouse was brightly lit, and in the center of the vast open space, a group of about a dozen men were in the middle of a heated, joyous ping-pong tournament. They were all middle-aged, all speaking rapid-fire Italian, laughing and cheering as they packed up their paddles and finished their beers. They all stopped dead and stared at me, the wild-eyed, disheveled girl who had just crashed their secret club. The silence was broken only by the echo of my own ragged breathing. "There is a man outside," I stammered, my voice trembling. "He is following me, in a silver car. I am so scared." The men all looked at each other, their expressions shifting from surprise to suspicion, and then to a kind of collective paternal concern. One of them, a stout man with a kind face, stepped forward. "It is okay," he said in a thick accent. "You are safe here. Where do you live? I will give you a ride." I have never been so grateful in my entire life. The man drove me the few blocks back to my apartment in his surprisingly fancy car. The entire ride, I kept apologizing and thanking him profusely. He just waved it off, telling me to be safe. When I got home, Mark was there and he was furious, not at the man who had followed me, but at me for putting myself in such a stupid situation. We had another fight, but this time I did not care. All I could think about was the man in the silver Buick and the strange, wonderful luck of stumbling upon a secret Italian ping-pong league in the middle of the night. Those men, my unlikely saviors, did not just give me a ride home. They saved me from something much, much worse. When I was 16, back in 2010, my friends and I were the kings and queens of a small, forgotten patch of our Dublin suburb. We called it The Field, though it was much more than that. It was a large, wild park that served as the unofficial backyard for our entire housing estate. On one side, it was bordered by the high stone wall of an old cemetery, and on another, by the sprawling, overgrown grounds of a once grand hotel that was now mostly derelict. It was our sanctuary, a place where we could escape from our parents and be ourselves. Our specific spot was a small clearing at the back of the field, surrounded by a thick, almost impenetrable ring of gorse and hawthorn bushes. We had carved out a little den inside one of the larger bushes, a secret place that was completely invisible from the outside. There was a man who lived on the edge of the estate who always gave us the creeps. We called him the Shuffler, because of the strange, hurried way he walked, his feet barely leaving the ground. He was probably in his 40s, a short, thin man with a balding head fringed by long, greasy tufts of grey hair. He would often walk the perimeter of the field, his eyes darting all over the place, never making direct contact, but we could always feel him watching us. Whenever we caught him looking, he would immediately avert his gaze and shuffle away, only to reappear a few minutes later from a different direction. In the safety of our large group, he was more of an annoyance than a threat. We would yell things at him, calling him a pervert and telling him to get lost, our youthful bravado making us feel invincible. One evening in early November, the sun had already set, and a cold, damp darkness had settled over the field. I had arranged to meet my friends there after dinner. I was early, and the field was dark and completely empty, with the fearless naivety that only a 16-year-old can possess. I did not think twice about waiting alone. I walked to our spot at the back of the park and slipped into our little den in the bushes. It was quiet. The only sound the distant traffic and the rustle of the wind in the bare branches. I sat on one of our makeshift log seats and lit a cigarette, the small flame momentarily illuminating the cramped, earthy space. After a few minutes of peaceful silence, I heard a rustling sound in the bushes nearby. I dismissed it as a fox or a stray cat. But the sound did not stop. It grew louder, more vigorous, the sound of something much larger moving through the undergrowth. It was not the furtive scampering of an animal. It was the deliberate heavy movement of a person. I stood up, my heart starting to beat a little faster, and peered out through a small gap in the leaves, trying to see what was making the noise. The darkness was almost absolute. Then, out of the blackness, he emerged. He did not just walk out of the bushes. It was more like he exploded out of them. A sudden, terrifying burst of movement. It was the Shuffler. He was standing in the clearing, not more than 10 feet away from my hiding spot. He was staring directly at me, or at least at the bush where I was hidden. And he was smiling. It was the most menacing, predatory grin I have ever seen, a wide, unnatural stretching of his lips that did not reach his dark, empty eyes. He slowly raised a single dirty finger to his lips in a chilling, silent, shushing gesture. A wave of pure, primal terror washed over me. I did not scream. I did not even think. My body just reacted. I bolted. I burst out of the back of our den, crashing through the thorny branches that tore at my clothes and skin. I stumbled at one point, my ankle twisting, but I caught myself before I fell and just kept running. The field seemed to stretch on forever, a vast, dark expanse. I did not look back. I was too terrified to see if he was chasing me. I could feel his presence behind me, a looming silent threat. I ran out of the park and did not stop until I reached my own street. The familiar glow of the streetlights, a welcome beacon. I ran all the way to my front door, fumbled with my keys, and fell inside, locking the door behind me. I never told my parents what happened. I was afraid they would not believe me, or worse, that they would, and I would lose my freedom to go to the field. But I never went back there alone again. A few years later, I heard through neighborhood gossip that the shuffler had been committed to a psychiatric hospital after he had brutally murdered his own father. The news sent a cold shiver down my spine. It validated my fear, confirming that the menace I had seen in his eyes that night was real and deadly. More than 20 years have passed since that night. A few months ago, I was on a bus heading into the city centre. I looked up from my phone, and there he was, sitting a few seats away. He was older, greyer, but it was unmistakably him. He was gazing around the bus with the same darting, creepy eyes I remembered so well. For a heart-stopping moment, his eyes met mine. But there was no recognition there. To him, I was just another anonymous face in the crowd. I got off at the next stop, my heart pounding, and watched the bus pull away, immensely grateful that I was just a stranger to him, and not the girl in the bushes he had tried to silence forever. In the brutal, sun-scorched summer of 2022, I was 19 and working a soul-crushing job at a hot dog stand outside a Home Depot in a suburb of Phoenix. I was a student at the local community college, and every dollar I earned from selling lukewarm hot dogs to sweaty contractors went towards tuition and textbooks. My mum and I shared a single, unreliable car, and our conflicting work schedules were a constant source of stress and logistical nightmares. One weekend, a solution presented itself. My older brother and his wife were out of town, and they told me I could stay at their place, which was only a 5-minute drive, or, as I was about to find out, a 20-minute walk from my job. That Saturday was particularly brutal. The temperature had climbed to 115 degrees, and the tiny metal food truck I worked in felt like a convection oven. By the end of my shift, I was dehydrated, exhausted, and covered in a fine sheen of grease and sweat. The thought of walking to my brother's house in that heat was daunting, but the thought of spending another night in our cramped, stuffy apartment was worse. So, I started my journey, walking along a wide 4-lane road that had no sidewalks. I had to walk in the dirt and gravel on the side of the road, my feet sinking into the soft, sun-baked earth, while cars sped past me in a blur of hot air. I was about halfway there, my head down, just focusing on putting one foot in front of the other, when a gleaming white Cadillac Escalade pulled up onto the shoulder beside me. The window rolled down with a smooth, silent hum, and a blast of cold, air-conditioned air washed over me. The man behind the wheel looked to be in his 40s, with perfectly styled hair, a crisp polo shirt, and an expensive-looking watch. He looked completely out of place in this dusty, working-class part of town. "Hey there," he called out, his voice a smooth, practiced baritone. "You need a ride?" I was so startled by the sudden appearance of the luxury vehicle that I answered on autopilot. "No, thank you," I said, not even breaking my stride. "Are you sure?" he insisted, letting the Escalade creep along at my walking pace. "It is really hot out here. A young girl like you should not be walking on a dangerous road like this." His tone was one of paternal concern, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of something too keen, too focused, that made me uneasy. I decided to lie. I did not want this stranger knowing where I was staying. "It is okay," I said, forcing a smile. "I am just going to that Walmart up there." I pointed to a shopping center that was in the opposite direction of my brother's neighborhood. He did not seem to buy it. "That is not a problem," he said, his smile unwavering. "I can take you. Just hop in. It is not out of my way." His insistence was starting to feel less like kindness and more like pressure. "No, really, I am good," I said, my own smile starting to feel strained. "I like walking." His friendly demeanor began to crack. A flicker of frustration crossed his face. "Look," he said, his voice taking on a harder edge, "I am just trying to be a nice guy here. You should be more grateful." Just then, a car behind him honked its horn, a long, impatient blast. He glanced in his rearview mirror and saw that he was holding up a line of traffic. He shot me one last, hard look, a scowl of pure annoyance on his face. "Whatever," he growled, and then he stomped on the gas, the Escalade's powerful engine roaring as he sped off, leaving me in a cloud of dust and exhaust fumes. I stood there for a moment, my heart pounding, the man's sudden anger leaving me shaken. I finished my walk in a state of high alert, constantly looking over my shoulder, my skin crawling with the memory of his intense gaze. I have thought about that afternoon a lot since then. Maybe he really was just a nice guy, a little pushy, a little arrogant, but ultimately harmless. Or maybe he was something else. Maybe his concern was a mask, his offer of a ride a lure. I will never know for sure what his intentions were, but I am profoundly grateful that I listened to that small, quiet voice of instinct that told me to say no, and that a line of impatient traffic appeared at exactly the right moment. The incident was a stark reminder that predators do not always look like monsters. Sometimes they look like nice guys in fancy cars, offering you a ride on a hot day. The summer of 2017 was a sweltering, sticky one in the small Louisiana town where my husband and I were living. We were 24, newly married, and so broke that the phrase "dirt poor" felt like a gentle euphemism. We had one beat-up car between us, which he needed for his construction job, so my daily commute consisted of a half-mile walk to and from the budget hotel off the highway, where I worked as a housekeeper. The walk was not pleasant. The air was thick with humidity, the sun was relentless, and the scenery consisted of cracked pavement and sun-bleached strip malls. But it was a part of my routine, a small hardship in a life full of them. I usually got off my shift at 3 in the afternoon, right at the peak of the day's heat. My uniform was already sticking to my skin, and my backpack containing my old, heavy laptop that I used for online classes felt like it weighed 100 pounds. But the walk home was also my time to decompress, to shed the stress of the day and mentally prepare for our cramped, non-air-conditioned apartment. One Tuesday, I was about halfway home, walking along the dusty shoulder of the main road. Up ahead, I saw a man standing on one of the side streets, right at the intersection. He was just standing there, watching the cars go by. He was tall and had a medium build, probably in his mid-30s, wearing a faded t-shirt and dirty jeans. I did not pay him much attention. There were always people milling about. But as I got closer, I noticed he had turned his attention from the traffic to me. He was staring. It was not a casual glance. It was a direct, focused stare that made my skin prickle with a sudden, inexplicable unease. I kept my head down and quickened my pace, hoping to just walk past him without incident. It did not work. "Hey girl," he yelled, his voice a loud, jarring sound in the lazy afternoon heat. He started walking out of the side street and into my path. At this point, he was standing directly between me and the direction of my house. I was on high alert now, my hand tightening on the strap of my backpack. He took a few steps towards me and yelled again. I just gave him a curt nod and tried to walk around him. "Where you going in such a hurry?" he asked, a smirk playing on his lips. He moved to block my path again. "I am going home," I said, my voice tight. "To my husband," I added, hoping the mention of a husband would act as some kind of deterrent. His smirk widened. "Why do not you come over to my house first?" he said, gesturing with his head back down the side street he had come from. "We can talk. You look like you could use a break from all that walking." "No, thank you," I said, and tried to step around him again. This time, he reached out and grabbed my arm. His grip was surprisingly strong. "I told you," he said, his voice losing all traces of friendliness, "to come back to my house so we can chat." Panic, pure and absolute, seized me. "No," I yelled, trying to jerk my arm away. "Let go of me. Do not touch me." The road was not deserted. Cars were passing by, their windows rolled up, the drivers and passengers sealed away in their cool, air-conditioned worlds. I saw faces turn, people looking, but no one stopped. No one did anything. In that moment, I felt completely and utterly alone, like I was invisible. My fear turned to a hot, desperate anger. He was not going to let go. I was still trying to pull away from him when my heavy backpack swung forward. I did not even think. I just reacted. I put all my strength into it and swung the backpack as hard as I could, aiming for his head. The corner of my heavy, obsolete laptop connected with his temple with a sickening thud. His eyes went wide with surprise and pain. His grip on my arm loosened for just a second, but it was all the time I needed. I tore myself away from him and ran. I ran down the side of the road, not looking back, my sandals slapping against the hot asphalt. I could hear him yelling behind me, a string of furious, bizarre insults. He was calling me an ungrateful so-and-so, screaming that he had just wanted to talk. I did not stop running until I reached the door of my apartment building. I burst inside, my body trembling, and collapsed into my husband's arms, sobbing out the whole ugly story. The most horrifying part was that I knew where he lived. The side street he had come from was on my route. I had to walk past it every single day on my way to and from work. For the rest of the time we lived in that apartment, every time I passed that corner, my heart would pound in my chest and I would have to fight the urge to run. It was a constant, daily reminder of how quickly a normal afternoon could turn into a nightmare and how utterly alone you can be, even when you are surrounded by people. I am a creature of habit. For the past 5 years, working as a government contractor in Washington, D.C., my days have been bracketed by the same routine. A pre-dawn drive to the Vienna metro station, a long train ride into the city, and the reverse journey home in the evening. I know the Vienna station like the back of my hand. I know which levels of the parking garage fill up first. I know the exact spot on the platform to stand to get a seat. And I know the particular kind of weary, grey-faced exhaustion that settles on the commuters on the late train home. One night in the fall of 2022, I was working late on a project deadline. It was after 10 o'clock when I finally got back to the Vienna station. The train had been mostly empty, and when I stepped out into the parking garage, the vast concrete structure was eerily quiet and deserted. Most of the commuters were long gone, and the remaining cars were scattered, creating long, dark stretches of empty space. The lighting in that garage is notoriously terrible, a patchwork of buzzing fluorescent tubes and deep, impenetrable shadows. My car, a black sports coupe that was probably a little too flashy for a government contractor, was parked in one of the far corners of the lot, near an exit that led directly from one of the station's secondary escalators. To prevent people from just walking across the nearest corner of the parking lot, the transit authority had installed a long guardrail and a thick, high row of dense, unkempt bushes. It created a blind corner, a perfect little pocket of isolation and darkness. As I came up the escalator and started walking along the edge of the bush line, My internal alarm system, a finely tuned instrument honed by years of city living, started to go off. Up ahead, in the poorly lit area where my car was parked, I saw two men. They were not walking, not talking, not doing anything. They were just there, loitering. Their posture was all wrong. They were trying to look casual, but there was a coiled, predatory stillness about them that was deeply unsettling. My gut screamed at me that they were waiting for something, or someone. I immediately stopped and changed my plan. Instead of walking the direct route along the dark, secluded bush line, I made a conscious decision to walk perpendicular to it, out into the more open, slightly better lit center of the garage. I was going to make a wide, sweeping J-turn, approaching my car from a completely different, more visible angle. It would take longer, but it would allow me to keep them in my sights. As I walked, I never took my eyes off them. I watched as they grew impatient, their feigned casualness starting to fray. They started to drift, almost unconsciously, towards the dark corner where my car was parked. They had chosen their spot. My heart was pounding, but I kept my pace steady and my expression neutral. As I made the curve of the J and started walking back towards my car, they saw me. Our eyes met across the 50 yards of empty concrete. In that instant, they knew that I had seen them, that I knew what they were, and that I had been watching them the entire time. Their reaction was instantaneous. They broke their formation, their predatory stillness dissolving into a clumsy, obvious attempt at nonchalance. They looked at each other, a flicker of silent communication passing between them, and then they turned and started walking back towards the center of the garage, trying to look like two friends who had just been heading for their own car. I did not wait to see where they went. I got to my car, got in, locked the doors, and started the engine. As I was driving out of the garage, I saw them in my rearview mirror, melting back into the shadows. I drove home feeling shaken, but also a little proud of myself for having trusted my instincts. I thought I had just cleverly avoided a mugging. It was not until I was at home, an hour later, watching the 11 o'clock news, that I understood the true gravity of what had happened. A news report came on about a violent crime at the Vienna metro station. A man had been robbed and murdered in the parking garage. The reporter said it happened around 10:30 in a poorly lit corner on the north side of the station. It was the exact spot where I had been parked. It had happened just minutes after I had driven away. A cold, sick feeling washed over me. I had not just avoided a robbery. I had narrowly and completely by chance avoided being the subject of that news report. The men in the garage had not just been waiting for anyone, they had been waiting for the next person to walk into their trap. And that person had been me. I have a phrase I have taught my own daughter now, a simple rule to live by. You see what you saw. If a person or a situation feels wrong, it is wrong. Do not second guess it. Do not try to be polite. Just get away. That night, a simple gut feeling and a walk in the shape of a J saved my life. I was 17, and my life in the fall of 2024 revolved around three things: school, my part-time job, and my two best friends, Maya and Chloe. We lived in Seattle, a city I loved for its constant energy and the way you could feel completely anonymous in a crowd. We relied heavily on public transit to get around, and the city bus was like a second home to us. It was where we did our homework, gossiped, and decompressed after a long day. We felt safe there, insulated from the world outside by a thin pane of glass. One evening in October, the three of us were on the bus, heading home from a shopping trip downtown. It was dark and raining, the kind of persistent Seattle drizzle that makes the city lights blur and reflect off the wet streets. We were all in our own little worlds. Chloe was napping, her head resting against the window. Maya was cramming for an English test, her face illuminated by the glow of her booklight. And I was listening to music, watching the familiar neighborhood slide by. We were sitting in our usual configuration, single seats, one behind the other, giving us each our own space. The bus hissed to a stop, and a few more people got on, shaking the rain from their coats. Among them was a man who immediately caught my attention. He was probably in his late 20s or early 30s, with short, dark blonde hair and a lean, athletic build. He was wearing a thin tank top and shorts, which was strange, given how cold and wet it was outside. There was an intensity about him, a coiled energy in the way he moved, that seemed out of place. He paid his fare, and his eyes swept over the passengers, lingering for a moment on Maya, before he took a seat across the aisle and a few rows ahead of us. At first, I did not think much of it, but a few minutes later, I noticed he had turned in his seat and was staring at Maya. It was not a casual glance. It was a fixed, unblinking stare. I felt a flicker of annoyance. Maya was 17, and she looked it. This guy was clearly much older. He held his gaze for a solid minute before turning back around. I thought that would be the end of it, but a minute later, he did it again. The same intense, predatory stare. Chloe was still asleep, and Maya was completely engrossed in her book, oblivious. I shot him a hard look, trying to convey with my eyes that I saw what he was doing and that he should stop. He met my gaze for a split second, a flicker of something unreadable in his expression, and then he turned away. The relief I felt was short-lived. He had stopped looking at Maya, but a minute later, he turned around for a third time, and this time, he was staring directly at me. His eyes were cold and empty, and his stare was so direct it felt like a physical touch. I quickly looked away, my heart starting to beat a little faster. I discreetly pulled out my phone and texted Maya. "Creepy guy a few rows up keeps staring. Just be aware." She glanced up from her book, read the text, and gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod before returning to her reading. The man turned back to face the front. But the strange, unsettling encounter was far from over. He started a bizarre, terrifying ritual. Every minute or so, he would turn his head and lock his eyes on me. And each time he did, he would reach up and press the button to request a stop. The little red "Stop Requested" sign would light up, and the automated voice would announce the next stop. Then, he would just sit there, staring at me, as the bus pulled over and the doors opened to an empty bus stop. He was not getting off. He was just pressing the button over and over while staring at me. It felt like a threat, a silent, terrifying message being sent just to me. My stop was coming up. My hands were slick with sweat. As the bus approached my corner, I reached up and pressed the stop button myself. The man turned and watched me as I stood up and gathered my things. As I walked towards the rear exit, he stood up too. My entire body went cold. He got off the bus right behind me. The rain had let up a little, but the air was cold. For a moment, we stood on the same corner. He turned and started walking in the opposite direction, and I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding. It was just a weird coincidence. But as I crossed the street to head towards the Safeway where I needed to pick up a few things for my mum, I glanced back. He had stopped walking. He was standing on the opposite corner, watching me. He saw me look at him, and then he turned and crossed the street too, so that he was now walking on the same side as me, but 100 feet back, perfectly paralleling my movements. I walked into the bright, sterile environment of the supermarket, the automatic doors sliding open with a welcoming whoosh. The place was mostly empty at this hour. I walked in, and I could hear his footsteps behind me, falling into a perfect, unnerving rhythm with my own. When I moved my left foot, he moved his. When I stopped, he stopped. I was being mirrored, stalked. I sped up and ducked into the beverage aisle, my heart hammering against my ribs. I grabbed a bottle of Coke from the cooler, my hand shaking, and then peeked around the end of the aisle. I could not see him. I walked quickly to the self-service checkout and started scanning my item. As the machine beeped, I saw him out of the corner of my eye. He was walking slowly past the checkout area, not even pretending to shop. He had not bought anything. He turned his head and gave me a look of such pure, chilling hatred that it made my blood run cold. It was an evil, venomous glare that promised violence. The transaction finished, and I grabbed my bag and practically ran for the exit. I did not look back until I was outside. He was coming out of the store right behind me, speed walking now, his face set in a grim, determined expression. He was trying to close the distance between us. That was when my survival instinct kicked in, overriding all thought. I ran home as fast as I could, a 10-minute sprint through the dark, wet streets, my lungs burning, my mind blank with terror. I did not stop, did not look back, until I was safely inside my house, the door locked and bolted behind me. I stood in my hallway, dripping rainwater onto the floor, gasping for air and wondering what would have happened if I had not run. I moved to Lisbon for work in 2022, leaving behind my home city of São Paulo, Brazil. I had fallen in love with Lisbon's laid-back charm, its beautiful tiled buildings, and most of all, its profound sense of safety. Compared to the constant, low-level anxiety of life in São Paulo, Lisbon felt like a sanctuary. For the first time in my life, I could walk home at night without constantly looking over my shoulder. In the summer of 2024, my family, my parents and my younger sister Julia came to visit for the first time. They were amazed by the city, but they could not shake the hypervigilance that had been ingrained in them by a lifetime of living in a place where danger was always a possibility. My father in particular was on constant alert, a habit that I found both endearing and a little frustrating. One evening, we had a wonderful dinner at a restaurant in the city centre. It had been a long, happy day of sightseeing, and as we started to make our way back to my apartment around 11 o'clock, my parents were tired, but in good spirits. I was leading the way, navigating the bustling nighttime crowds, feeling proud to be showing them my safe new home. I was chatting with my mum when I first noticed them. There were two men walking towards us on the opposite side of the narrow street. They were holding up their phones as if they were filming a video, a common enough sight in a city full of tourists. But something about them felt wrong. Their phones were pointed not at the historic buildings, but vaguely in our direction. I dismissed it as a coincidence and kept walking. A few minutes later, I saw them again. They had somehow crossed the street and were now standing at a corner just a few meters ahead of us, pretending to look at a map on their phone. They had doubled back. They were waiting for us. My internal alarm bells, long dormant since moving to Europe, started to ring. I did not want to alarm my family, especially my anxious mother, so I tried to act casual. As we passed them, I subtly maneuvered myself so that my tall, broad-shouldered father was between me and them. I could feel their eyes on me as we walked past. I hoped that would be the end of it, but it was not. They started following us, keeping a distance of about 20 feet. They were not subtle about it. I glanced back and saw them talking to each other, their eyes darting towards me. My sense of safety was rapidly evaporating, replaced by the familiar, sickening feeling of being prey. I tried to use the crowds to our advantage, weaving through groups of people, but they were skilled at navigating the chaos, always managing to keep us in their sights. We descended into the metro station, the air growing warm and thick with the smell of people and electricity. I hoped the enclosed, brightly lit space and the presence of security cameras would deter them. It did not. They followed us through the turnstiles and onto the crowded platform. The situation escalated on the escalator down to the train line. One of the men managed to get on right behind my father. He was so close I could see the logo on his t-shirt. He kept trying to look around my dad to make eye contact with me, and he had his hand held strangely over his mouth, as if he were trying to hide his face from the overhead cameras while still being able to see. The train arrived, and we were swept inside with the crowd. I managed to get my mum and sister into seats while my dad and I stood near the door. The two men stood a few feet away, pretending to be engrossed in their phones, but I could see them watching my reflection in the dark glass of the window. My father, who had been oblivious up to this point, finally noticed. I saw his posture change, his body becoming tense and rigid. He understood. He did not say a word, but he moved to stand directly in front of me, creating a human shield. For the next few stops, it was a silent, terrifying battle of wills. We got off at our stop, and they got off right behind us. The station was less crowded here, and the feeling of being exposed was intense. We started walking quickly towards the exit, and they followed, their footsteps echoing ours. We managed to get ahead of them in the crowd heading for the final set of stairs. As we reached the top and were about to exit onto the street, I risked one last look back. I saw them standing at the bottom of the stairs. They had stopped following us. One of them was saying something to the other, and then he raised his arm and pointed, his finger aimed directly at me. It was not a gesture of anger, it was a gesture of identification, of marking a target. We did not stop walking until we were safely inside my apartment, the door double locked behind us. My father was furious, my mother was in tears, and I was just numb. The sanctuary I had built for myself in this new city had been violated. That night, I could not shake the feeling that we had narrowly escaped something truly terrible, a highly organized and sinister operation that viewed people as commodities. The safety I had cherished in Lisbon was an illusion, and the fears my family had brought with them from Brazil had been horribly, terrifyingly validated. My senior year of high school in 2024 was defined by a single 4-block walk. That was the distance between my house and my school in our mid-sized California city, a place with a tough reputation that I had always navigated with a kind of cautious confidence. On my way home, I would sometimes stop at the small park on the second block. It was not much, just a swing set and a couple of benches, but it was my little patch of peace, a place to decompress before heading home to a house full of noisy siblings. I had my routines, my safe spaces, and I thought I knew how to handle myself. One afternoon in early September, I was walking to school when two men at the bus stop on the first block stopped me. They were older, probably in their 50s. One of them, who I would later learn was named Mark, had a creepy, fixed smile on his face. He held out his fist, wanting a fist bump. Not wanting to be rude or cause a scene, I quickly, reluctantly bumped his knuckles with my own. The other man just asked me if I spoke Spanish. I said no, and that should have been the end of it. But then Mark stood up, and for a terrifying second, I thought he was going to come after me. I took a step back, my fight or flight response kicking in. He just walked past me, but as I continued on my way, he started catcalling me in Spanish. I did not understand all the words, but I understood the leering tone and the gestures he was making. It was disgusting. I felt a hot wave of shame and anger wash over me. A 50-year-old man was making vulgar remarks about a 17-year-old girl. I got to school safely and told my favorite teacher what had happened. She was sympathetic, but there was nothing anyone could do. I changed my route to school after that, avoiding that bus stop for months. The memory faded, and I started to feel safe again. I even started stopping at my little park again. Fast forward to a few days ago. It was Halloween afternoon, and the air was buzzing with a strange, chaotic energy. I had been at the park, trying to finish some homework, but decided to head home early. I knew the night would bring out all kinds of strange characters, and my city was not a place you wanted to be out alone in after dark, especially with the recent, terrifying news reports about human trafficking in our area. I was waiting at the crosswalk, ready to cross the street to the first block, the block where I lived. I looked across the street and my heart sank into my stomach. It was him, Mark. He was just roaming the sidewalk on the other side. At first, I was not sure. It had been months. But then he saw me. He remembered me. There was no doubt. A wide, terrifying grin spread across his face, and he let out a loud, maniacal laugh that was completely unhinged. I had no choice. The crosswalk was the quickest, most direct route to my house. The walk sign lit up, and I started to cross, my heart pounding in my chest. He was walking towards me, his eyes locked on mine. He timed his steps perfectly so that we would meet in the middle of my block, right next to a long, thick hedge that ran the length of someone's front yard. He tried to corner me, using his body to block my path and pin me against the prickly leaves. My survival instincts took over. He reached for my shoulder and I ducked under his arm, twisted away, and ran. I ran faster than I ever have in my life, not daring to look back, the sound of his crazed laughter chasing me down the street. I burst through my front door and slammed it shut, my mum rushing into the hallway to see what was wrong. I told her everything, and she held me as I sobbed, the full weight of the terror finally hitting me. I have not been to school since. My mum refuses to let me walk alone anymore. What scares me the most is not just what happened, but what could have happened. My small 4-block world and my even smaller sanctuary of a park have been stolen from me, and I am terrified that the next time I see him, I might not be able to get away. My grandmother, Nonna, lived just 1 block away from me in a small, identical house in our quiet Portland suburb. For me, at 15 years old in the winter of 2023, that single block was the safest and most familiar journey in the world. It was a path I had walked thousands of times, ever since I was old enough to be trusted on my own. My Nonna's house was a haven of warmth and the incredible smell of garlic and tomatoes. A quick 10-minute walk meant I would be returning home with a container of her legendary pasta, still warm and radiating a comforting heat through the plastic. The walk itself was simple. Her street connected to mine in a straight line, but the two were separated by a long, narrow patch of undeveloped land, a thick, tangled strip of woods that had been there as long as the houses had. It was full of thorny blackberry bushes, towering Douglas firs, and a dense undergrowth that made it impossible to take a shortcut. As kids, we had dared each other to go in, but no one ever made it more than a few feet before being turned back by the thorns and the unnerving, shadowy quiet within. One Tuesday afternoon, the sky was a flat, Oregon grey, and the air had a damp chill that promised rain later. I had spent a couple of hours at Nonna's, ostensibly to help her with her computer, but really just to sit in her warm kitchen and listen to her stories. As I was getting ready to leave, she handed me a large Tupperware container filled with pasta and broccoli in a creamy garlic sauce. It was still steaming. "For your dinner," she said, kissing my cheek. "You are too skinny." I started my walk home, clutching the warm container in my hands. The warmth was a small comfort against the cold air. The street was quiet, as it usually was on a weekday afternoon. Most people were still at work. I remember looking down at the sidewalk, tracing the familiar cracks with my eyes, lost in my own thoughts about an upcoming history test. I was just reaching the midpoint of the block, with the dark, silent wall of the woods to my right, when a voice cut through the quiet. "Hey, where are you going?" I looked up and to my left, towards the road. A plain white work van, the kind with no windows in the back, had slowed to a stop beside me. The driver, a thin man with a sallow face and tired-looking eyes, was leaning across the passenger seat, a strange, forced smile on his lips. He was driving in the opposite direction, and I assumed he was just lost. "Home," I said simply, and kept walking, picking up my pace just a little. I did not want to be rude, but I also did not want to engage. "Hey, wait," he called out, his voice a little more insistent now. I glanced back and saw he was craning his neck out of the driver's side window, watching me. "I can give you a ride home. Come on, get in." His smile looked more like a grimace now. "No, thank you," I said loudly and clearly, without looking back at him. A cold feeling was starting to prickle at the back of my neck. I kept walking, my heart starting to beat a little faster. I heard the van's engine rev, and then the sound of it driving away. I stopped and turned, watching until its taillights disappeared around the corner. I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding. The street was silent again. But the silence felt different now. It was heavier, more menacing. The woods to my right, which had always been just a familiar landmark, suddenly seemed darker, more sinister. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig from within the trees sounded like a footstep. I told myself I was being silly, that it was just the wind or a squirrel. I picked up my pace, my sneakers making soft, hurried sounds on the pavement. I just wanted to be home. I heard a vehicle coming up behind me. I did not want to look. I told myself it was a neighbor, that it was fine, but the cold dread in my stomach was undeniable. I forced myself to glance over my shoulder. It was the same white van, but this time, it was not just slowing down. It was pulling over to the curb right beside me, its engine still running. Then, everything happened in a horrifying, slow-motion blur. The side cargo door of the van slid open with a loud, metallic clatter. A second man, a man I had not seen before, jumped out. He was the complete opposite of the driver, big and heavyset, with a thick neck and a furious, angry expression on his face. He landed on the pavement with a heavy thud and started moving towards me. I did not think. My body reacted on pure animal instinct. I turned to my right and plunged into the woods. The thorns I had avoided my entire life were now my only escape route. They tore at my jeans and my jacket, slicing at my skin, but I barely felt it. I was running on pure adrenaline, my mind a white-hot blank of terror. I was still clutching the Tupperware of pasta, a ridiculous, absurd detail in a moment of life-or-death fear. It was like I was clinging to the last piece of my normal, safe world. I risked a single glance back. The thick brush was slowing the big man down, but not by much. I could hear him crashing through the undergrowth behind me, cursing as branches whipped at his face. I knew these woods bordered my own backyard. There was a chain-link fence, I just had to reach it. I kept running, my lungs on fire, my heart feeling like it was going to explode out of my chest. I could hear his heavy, ragged breathing getting closer. I saw the fence through the trees, a shimmering grey line in the gloom. I reached it, and without hesitating, I chucked the Tupperware container over. It landed with a soft thud on the other side. I started to climb, my fingers clumsy on the cold metal. My jeans caught on the top, and I heard a loud ripping sound, but I did not care. I threw myself over, landing in a heap on the damp grass of my own backyard. I scrambled to my feet and ran for the back porch, banging on the sliding glass door with both fists. My dad opened it, his face a mask of confusion that quickly turned to alarm as he saw the state I was in. Covered in dirt and scratches, my face pale with terror. I stumbled inside, sobbing, trying to lock the door behind me, my hands shaking too much to work the latch. I finally felt safe, with my dad there and our two big Rottweilers barking furiously at the fence line. He sat me down at the kitchen table while I gasped out the story. He immediately called the police. 2 officers arrived about 20 minutes later. They took my statement, but their attitude was dismissive, almost bored. "A white van?" one of them said with a sigh. "Honey, do you know how many white vans there are in this city?" He then had the nerve to tell me that filing a false report was a crime. They left without even taking a walk through the woods. My dad swore he believed me, and that night he moved my mattress into his room so I would not have to sleep alone. I could not eat, I could not sleep. The pasta from Nonna sat on the kitchen counter, forgotten. For months afterward, I was a wreck. Every time I saw a white van, my heart would leap into my throat. My dad installed a new alarm system and bought me my first cell phone. But those things could not fix what was broken. The feeling of safety in my own neighborhood, on that simple 1-block walk, was gone forever, torn away by the thorns in the woods and the 2 men in the white van. I was 16 back in the fall of 2023, living in a sprawling, quiet suburb of Portland, Oregon. It was the kind of place where the nights were dark and the main sources of entertainment for a teenager were either driving around aimlessly or finding a secluded spot to just hang out. My two best friends, Liam and Josh, and I were experts at the latter. Our preferred spot was behind the local middle school, a place we'd all attended and now felt a certain ironic ownership of. It was set back from the road, surrounded by a large unkempt field that bordered a thick patch of woods, offering the perfect blend of privacy and a quick escape route if needed. On this particular Friday night, the air had a sharp, autumnal bite to it. We were not doing much of anything, just sitting on a cold concrete retaining wall, talking about school, music, and the general pointlessness of everything, as teenagers do. We were deep in a debate about some video game when the crunch of tires on the gravel service road cut through the quiet. We all fell silent. A car, a dark, older model sedan, rolled slowly around the back of the school and came to a stop about 100 yards away. Its headlights cut two perfect cones through the darkness, illuminating a swath of dying grass. A man got out. We could not make out his features, just a tall, broad silhouette against the glare. He started walking towards us, not quickly, but with a deliberate, unhurried pace that was somehow more unnerving than a full-on sprint. Our collective teenage brain, conditioned by years of getting into minor trouble, jumped to one conclusion: a cop or a security guard coming to tell us to leave. Without a word, we were on our feet and running. It was an instinctual, almost choreographed movement. We vaulted a low chain-link fence, sprinted across the damp field, and cut through a small residential street, our laughter echoing nervously in the quiet night as the adrenaline kicked in. We emerged onto the main commercial drag, a long, straight road that sliced through the center of our town. It would take us most of the way home. The initial fear faded, replaced by a cocky sense of accomplishment. We had gotten away. We walked along the wide, well-lit sidewalk, past closed-down dental offices and insurance agencies. Up ahead, we saw the familiar, comforting glow of the Quick Stop, a 24-hour convenience store that had been the destination of 1,000 late-night snack runs since we were kids. Its parking lot was mostly empty, save for an employee's car parked near the front door. To the right of the building was a narrow, dark alleyway, crammed with overflowing dumpsters and leading to the back of the building. As we were about to walk past the entrance to the alley, a pair of headlights flashed on and off, twice. We stopped, confused. Then, an engine roared to life, and the same dark sedan we had seen at the school shot out of the alleyway, its tires squealing on the pavement. It swerved directly towards us, its headlights blindingly bright. We yelled and scrambled backwards, stumbling over the curb to get out of its way. The car did not stop or even slow down. It pulled out onto the main road, but instead of turning towards us to continue the pursuit, it turned the opposite direction and sped off into the darkness. We stood there for a moment, hearts hammering, trying to process what had just happened. That was not a security guard. That was something else entirely. "What the hell was that?" Josh breathed, his voice shaky. We tried to laugh it off as just some random crazy driver, a creepy coincidence, but the explanation felt thin and unconvincing. They had been waiting for us in that alley. They knew we would walk this way. We picked up our pace, casting anxious glances over our shoulders, the familiar street now feeling hostile and full of unseen threats. About 10 minutes later, as we were approaching the large bridge that marked the entrance to our residential neighborhood, we saw the car again. It was coming up behind us, driving slowly. It pulled up alongside us, and a window rolled down. I could see two men inside now, both just dark shapes in the unlit car. A voice, low and gravelly, drifted out. "We are still coming for you." And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the car accelerated and sped off, disappearing over the crest of the bridge ahead of us. A cold, genuine fear had set in now. This was not a joke. We ran. We ran until we reached the bridge, a massive concrete structure that loomed over a small, fast-moving river and a large, dark forested area that was notorious for being a place where people got lost. The bridge itself was like a mini highway, with 2 lanes of traffic going in each direction and no shoulder or place for a car to stop. Underneath it, accessible by a steep dirt path, was a wide, graffiti-covered concrete area. It was our only option. We scrambled down the path and hid in the deep shadows under the bridge, our breathing ragged. We stayed there for what felt like an eternity, but was probably closer to half an hour. The initial terror slowly gave way to a nervous, whispered debate. Who were they? What did they want? We were just a bunch of dumb kids. We had nothing to offer anyone. We tried to rationalize it, to find some explanation that made sense, but we came up with nothing. The only sounds were the rush of the river and the rumble of the occasional car passing overhead. Eventually, a fragile sense of safety returned. We reasoned that they must have given up. There was no way they could have known we would hide here. Feeling a bit more confident, we decided to make a break for it. We climbed back up the dirt path and stepped out onto the bridge's narrow pedestrian walkway. We looked both ways. The bridge was completely empty. There was nowhere for a car to have been waiting. We started walking, sticking close to the railing, ready to run at a moment's notice. We had made it about halfway across when we heard it. An engine starting up. It sounded impossibly close. We looked around, confused. There was nowhere for a car to have been hiding. Then, the dark sedan pulled out from behind a large concrete support pillar, a spot that should not have been accessible by a vehicle. They must have driven down some hidden access road. They had known we were under the bridge the whole time. They had been waiting. The car crept up alongside us, matching our terrified, frozen pace. The window rolled down again. It was the same voice, laced with a chilling amusement. "You thought you could get away from us," he said. "We will always find you." That was it. We ran. We sprinted the rest of the way across the bridge and into the labyrinth of our suburban neighborhood. It was an area we knew like the back of our hands, a maze of curving streets, cul-de-sacs, and small parks that connected them. We did not stop to talk or plan. We just split up, each of us taking a different route, a silent, instinctual agreement that our best chance was to divide their attention. I ran harder than I ever have in my life, my lungs burning, my legs screaming, not daring to look back. I took every shortcut I knew, cutting through yards, vaulting fences, until I finally burst through my own front door, slamming and locking it behind me. I stood there in the entryway, gasping for air, my entire body trembling. I never saw the car again, and we never spoke of that night to any adults. But I will never forget the feeling of being hunted, and the terrifying knowledge that there are people in the world who will chase you just for the thrill of it. In the spring of 2022, my life was in a state of suspended animation. My mum was undergoing intensive treatment for cancer at a specialized wellness clinic in Sedona, Arizona. I had taken a leave of absence from my job and was staying with her in a small rented condo. The town was beautiful, a surreal landscape of stunning red rock formations and twisted juniper trees, but the beauty was lost on me. My world had shrunk to the quiet, sterile rooms of the clinic and the heavy weight of worry that sat on my chest day and night. The town itself was an odd mix of New Age spiritualists, wealthy retirees, and people like my mum, who had come seeking healing. It was a place that was supposed to be serene and safe. One afternoon, my mum was resting, and the walls of the condo felt like they were closing in on me. I needed to get out, to breathe air that did not smell like disinfectant. I decided to go for a walk in a large community park that was situated between the older part of town and the clinic. It was a sprawling, beautifully landscaped area with winding paths, footbridges that crossed over a dry creek bed, and patches of manicured gardens interspersed with wild, natural desert flora. It was the middle of the day, bright and sunny, and there were other people around, mostly older couples out for a stroll, or families with young children. I chose a path that led down into a sunken grotto-like area where a small decorative fountain trickled water over smooth grey stones. It was meant to be a place of quiet contemplation. As I approached, I saw him. At first, all I saw was the top of a man's head popping up from below the level of the path. He was looking directly at me. I assumed I had startled him, and I did that normal, awkward thing where you make eye contact for a second and then quickly look away. But when I glanced back, he was still staring at me, his gaze intense and unwavering. Then I noticed what he was doing. He was standing in the shallow water of the fountain, and he had one arm crossed over his chest, his hand moving rhythmically under his shirt. My mind took a second to process the image, to accept what I was seeing. He was touching himself, right there, in the middle of the day, in a public park. A wave of disgust and shock washed over me. I immediately changed my direction, veering off the path to give him as wide a berth as possible. I tried to convince myself it had nothing to do with me, that he was just a random creep being a creep, and if I just kept walking, he would be left behind. I picked up my pace and headed towards a more open, grassy area of the park, still close to the main road, where cafes and shops were visible. I was rattled, but I tried to push the image from my mind. After a minute or two, I looked back towards the fountain, expecting him to be gone. He was, but he was not gone from the park. I did a quick, panicked scan of the area and spotted him. He had gotten out of the fountain and was now walking on a parallel path, making a wide loop that would, if we both continued, eventually intersect with my own path further ahead. I could not believe it. This was not random. He was following me. My heart started to beat faster. I was in a quiet, peaceful town filled with sick and elderly people. This was the last place I would have ever expected to feel threatened. I stopped walking and tried to figure out what to do. My instinct was to get away from him as quickly as possible. In a moment of flawed logic, I turned onto a smaller, less traveled path that headed up a small hill towards a heavily wooded area. I thought I could lose him in the trees. I had just reached the edge of the woods when I looked back again. He had changed his direction too. He was no longer on the parallel path. He was now practically jogging up a trail that I could see would eventually merge with the wooded path I was about to take. He was trying to cut me off. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. If I went into those woods, I would be completely alone with him, hidden from public view. I froze at the trailhead, my mind racing. My instinct had been wrong, a potentially fatal mistake. I waited until he was momentarily out of sight behind a large rock formation. Then I turned around and walked as quickly as I could back the way I came, heading for the wide open, grassy part of the park. I got to a safe distance, near a bench where an elderly couple was sitting, and I pulled out my phone. I held it up and started recording, pretending I was on a video chat with a friend. "Oh my gosh, you will not believe how beautiful it is here," I said in a loud, cheerful voice, panning my phone's camera around the park. My performance was for an audience of one, and it worked. A minute later, he came jogging down the very path I had just abandoned. He stopped at the bottom, looking left and right, his frustration evident. He was looking for me. Then his eyes scanned the open area, and he spotted me. I had dyed my hair a bright, fiery red a few weeks earlier, an act of defiance against the bleakness of my life, and it made me impossible to miss. His face fell as he saw me standing near other people, my phone held up, clearly talking to someone. I kept up my act, wandering around the open part of the park, always keeping him in my line of sight. It became a strange, silent test of wills. He kept trying to follow me, but he was more cautious now, trying to stay out of sight, ducking behind trees and large cacti. At one point, I turned around suddenly and caught him in the open, and he literally sprinted back into the cover of some trees. Eventually, I walked up a steep, exposed hill where there was absolutely no cover for him to use, and I lost track of him. I never saw him again that day, but the experience left me deeply shaken. It was a terrifying reminder that my gut feelings were not paranoia. They were a survival mechanism, and in a world that already felt so precarious because of my mom's illness, my own sense of safety had just been proven to be a complete illusion. At 16, I felt like a seasoned veteran of Chicago's public transit system. In the winter of 2024, my daily routine involved taking the L train and then a bus to get home from my after-school job. It was a long, often tedious journey, but I knew the routes by heart. I knew which cars were the quietest, which seats had the best view, and how to navigate the bustling crowds with an efficiency that made me feel like a true city kid. I had my defenses up. I kept my music low, my head on a swivel, and a look on my face that I hoped broadcasted a clear, "Do not mess with me" message. But some predators are not deterred by a show of confidence. One frigid evening in January, the sun had long since set, and the city was dark. I boarded the train, the warm, stuffy air a welcome relief from the biting wind. The car was about half full, with plenty of open seats. I chose my usual spot, a window seat in the corner, and settled in for the ride. At the next stop, a man got on who made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. He was maybe in his late 40s, with a sallow, pockmarked face and clothes that looked like they had not been washed in weeks. He scanned the car, his eyes passing over the empty double seats, and then he walked directly to my row and sat down right next to me, effectively trapping me against the window. The air around him smelled of stale beer and unwashed laundry. I shrank away from him, pressing myself against the cold glass. "Where you headed?" he asked, his voice a low, raspy whisper. "I am meeting some friends," I lied, automatically, my voice coming out smaller and more timid than I would have liked. I did not want this stranger knowing I was on my way home, that I would soon be alone. He leaned in closer, his proximity making my skin crawl. "You are very pretty," he said. "Can I have a hug?" "No," I said firmly, staring straight ahead at the darkened window, trying to will him away with the force of my discomfort. "Come on," he wheedled. "I need a hug. My wife just died." There was a pause. I did not respond. "And my daughter," he added, his voice taking on a pathetic, manipulative tone. "She died too. Everyone is gone." I put in my earbuds, turning my music up loud enough to drown him out, a clear signal that the conversation was over. But he was not done. For the next 20 minutes, he continued to talk at me, constant low murmur of made-up tragedies and creepy compliments that I could thankfully no longer hear. When the automated voice announced my stop, I felt a wave of relief so intense it almost made me dizzy. I stood up the second the doors opened and practically ran off the train. The relief lasted for about 10 seconds. I looked over my shoulder and saw him getting off too. He followed me through the station and up the stairs to the street-level bus stop. I stood at the very edge of the small group of people waiting, trying to put as much distance between us as possible. The wind was brutal, and I shivered in my thin coat. As the bus approached, its headlights cutting through the darkness, he moved towards me. He came up behind me and wrapped his arms around me in a grotesque, unwelcome embrace. "This is my girlfriend," he announced to the other people waiting, who all studiously avoided making eye contact. "Isn't she beautiful?" I froze, paralyzed by a mixture of fear and humiliation. I got on the bus, my body trembling, and he followed me, sitting down next to me again before I had a chance to choose a seat where I was not trapped. "I will walk you to your friend's house," he said, his hand resting on my knee. "Make sure you get there safe." I pulled my phone out of my bag, my hands shaking, my plan to call my mum and have her meet me at the bus stop already forming in my mind. The screen was black. The cold had killed my battery. A new, more potent wave of fear washed over me. I was completely, utterly alone. As the bus made its stops, the other passengers got off one by one until it was just me, him, the driver, and one other man sitting at the very back of the bus. The man in the back was young, probably college-aged, and he was watching us. I kept looking at him, my eyes wide, trying to silently plead with him, to convey the terror that was choking me. The creep next to me was still talking, but I was not listening anymore. All of my focus was on the man in the back, my last and only hope. He saw it. He saw the panic in my eyes. He stood up and walked to the front of the bus. He stood over us, his expression firm. "Hey," he said, his voice calm but authoritative. "Leave her alone. She clearly does not want you bothering her." The creep's entire demeanor changed in an instant. The pathetic, needy act vanished, replaced by a raw, snarling aggression. "What did you say to me?" he spat, getting to his feet. "You want to fight? Let's go." The next stop was coming up. The young man did not engage, he just stood his ground. As the bus hissed to a stop and the doors opened, he grabbed the creep by the arm and, with a strength that surprised me, physically pulled him off the bus and onto the sidewalk. The doors closed and the bus pulled away, leaving the creep on the curb, screaming profanities at us. I was shaking so hard I could not speak. The young man came and sat across from me. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. I could only nod, tears of relief and gratitude streaming down my face. He stayed on the bus with me until my stop, even though it was past his own, just to make sure I was safe. I never got his name, but I will never forget his face. He was a stranger who saw another person in trouble and chose to act. He was a hero. My friend Sarah and I had a standing tradition. Every Friday night, no matter how stressful our weeks at our dead-end retail jobs had been, we would meet at the Denny's just off the highway in our quiet suburb of Columbus, Ohio. It was our ritual, a way to mark the end of the work week and the beginning of 2 days of glorious freedom. We would slide into a booth, order 2 giant chocolate milkshakes, and just talk for hours. It was the winter of 2022, and the first real snow of the season had just fallen, blanketing the world in a pristine, silent layer of white. That night, I was the first one to arrive. I pulled my 10-year-old Honda Civic into the mostly empty parking lot and parked on the far side of the building, away from the main entrance. As I was getting out of my car, I noticed a man standing near the edge of the lot, by the road. He was just loitering, smoking a cigarette, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of a thin jacket. He was wearing a bright red Chicago Bears beanie that stood out against the snowy landscape. I registered him as slightly odd. Who hangs out in a Denny's parking lot on a freezing night? But I dismissed it and went inside. Sarah arrived a few minutes later, and our night proceeded as usual. We complained about our bosses, planned our weekend, and drank our milkshakes. About an hour later, we headed back out into the cold. As we were walking to our cars, we saw the man again. He was in the same spot, still smoking, just watching the cars go by on the highway. "That guy is still here," Sarah commented. Weird. We shrugged it off, said our goodbyes, and went our separate ways. The drive home took about 20 minutes. The roads were a little slick, so I drove slowly, listening to a podcast, the familiar route comforting in the quiet, snowy night. I got home, let my 2 Beagle mixers, Buster and Duke, out into the backyard, and then settled onto the couch to watch a movie. I must have dozed off, because the next thing I knew, it was almost 1 in the morning, and the dogs were going absolutely ballistic. They were at the big picture window in the living room, the one that looked out onto the driveway, barking with a frantic, ferocious intensity that I had never heard before. Annoyed, I got up to see what was wrong. I assumed it was a raccoon or a stray cat. I pulled back the curtain and looked out, and my blood ran cold. The trunk of my car was wide open. For a second, my mind refused to process it. My first thought was that I must have hit the trunk release button on my key fob by accident. But that did not explain why the dogs were acting like there was an intruder on the property. My annoyance turned to a cold, creeping fear. I pulled on my boots and my coat and cautiously went outside, my phone in my hand, ready to call 911. The air was frigid and my breath plumed in front of my face. I walked slowly towards my car, and that is when I saw them. Footprints in the fresh snow. A single set of tracks leading from the side of the road, up my driveway, to the driver's side door of my car, and then to the trunk. And there, lying in the snow next to the open trunk, was a bright red Chicago Bears beanie. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I looked inside the car. The panel under the steering wheel was ripped open, exposing a mess of wires. A few of them had been cut, and there was a small, thin piece of metal, a shim, stuck in the ignition. Someone had tried to hotwire my car. I called the police, my voice shaking so badly I could barely speak. An officer arrived and took a look around. He confirmed what I already knew. It was a botched car theft. But then he looked at the footprints again, and his expression grew serious. "There are no tracks leading away from the vehicle," he said, shining his flashlight around the driveway. "Just the ones leading to it." We were both silent for a moment, the only sound the crunch of his boots in the snow. And then, the horrifying, impossible realization hit both of us at the same time. I looked at the officer, my eyes wide with a dawning, sickening horror. "He did not walk here from Denny's," I whispered, the words feeling like ice in my mouth. The man in the red beanie had not followed me home. He had not waited for me to leave and then trailed me across town. He had seen me park, a single woman in an ordinary, easy-to-steal car, and while I was inside, laughing with my friend and drinking a milkshake, he had slipped into my unlocked car, folded himself into the trunk, and waited. He had ridden home with me, a silent, hidden passenger, just a few feet behind my head. He had been in my car, in my driveway, for almost an hour, waiting for the house to go dark, waiting for me to go to sleep before trying to steal the very car he had used for transport. The thought of that 20-minute drive home, of me listening to my podcast, completely oblivious, while a strange man was lying in my trunk, still makes me feel physically ill. My dogs did not just save my car that night. They saved me. In the summer of 2023, I was 17 and had just gotten my driver's license. That little plastic card felt like a key to the entire world. I had a beat-up but beloved Subaru Crosstrek and a newfound sense of freedom that I was determined to take full advantage of. I lived in a suburb of Denver, and my new favorite pastime was sneaking out late at night to explore. I was not into partying or drinking. I was into photography. I loved the way the world looked after midnight, empty and still and strange. One night, I drove out to the area around the old Lowry Air Force Base. It had been decommissioned for years, and parts of it had been redeveloped into neat suburban neighborhoods. But there were still vast, empty stretches of old runways and abandoned buildings that were incredibly eerie and photogenic. Near one of the old entrances, there was a trailhead for a walking path with a small gravel parking lot. I pulled in around 2 a.m, parked, and got out with my camera and tripod. The air was cool, and the only sounds were the distant hum of the highway and the chirping of crickets. I spent about an hour taking long exposure shots of the stars over the skeletal remains of an old hangar. I was completely lost in my own little world. When I had gotten the shots I wanted, I packed up my gear and headed back to my car. As I was pulling out of the gravel lot, I noticed another car parked in the shadows at the far end. It was a black Dodge Charger, sleek and menacing even in the dark. Its lights were off. A small flicker of unease went through me, but I brushed it off. It was probably just some other teenagers, maybe making out or smoking. I turned onto the main road that led back towards the city and did not give it a second thought. I drove for a few minutes, the empty road stretching out in front of me. I glanced in my rearview mirror, and my heart skipped a beat. Headlights had appeared behind me, seemingly out of nowhere. It was the black Charger. It was keeping a steady distance, but its presence felt heavy, wrong. I told myself I was being paranoid. The road led back to a major intersection. Of course, someone else would be on it. But when I put on my blinker to turn right at the upcoming traffic light, the Charger's blinker came on too. The knot of unease in my stomach tightened. The city was completely dead at this hour. There were no other cars on the road. It was just me and this black car. I decided to test my theory. The speed limit was 45, so I pushed my Subaru up to 55. The Charger matched my speed instantly. I slowed down to 40. It slowed down too, maintaining the exact same distance behind me. This was not a coincidence. I was being followed. Panic, cold and sharp, began to set in. My mind raced. I was a 17-year-old girl, alone in the middle of the night, and a stranger was actively pursuing me. I could not call my parents. They would kill me for sneaking out. I thought about calling the police, but I was terrified of getting a ticket for breaking the teen driving curfew. It sounds stupid now, but in that moment of pure fear, my teenage brain was still worried about getting in trouble. I could not just drive home. I could not lead them right to my front door. My Aunt Kate lived about 10 minutes away, further out in a more rural part of the suburbs. It was my only option. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking so badly I could barely unlock it. I called her, my voice a panicked whisper. "Aunt Kate," I said, my words tumbling over each other. "I think someone is following me. A black car. I do not know what to do." Her voice on the other end was calm and steady, a lifeline in my sea of terror. "Okay, Maya," she said. "Do not go home. Come to my house. I will be waiting for you. And I'm bringing Duke out with me." Duke was her 100-pound pit bull mix, a gentle giant who looked like he could tear a car door off its hinges. "Okay," I breathed. The Charger was still behind me, a dark, inescapable shadow. "I am on my way." The drive to my aunt's house was the most terrifying 10 minutes of my life. The road became a dark country lane with no streetlights. I pushed my car faster and faster, hoping to lose him, but the Charger was a powerful machine. It stayed right on my tail. My speedometer climbed to 80, then 90, then 100 miles per hour. The world outside my windows dissolved into a blur of dark trees and fleeting fence posts. The Charger was always there, its headlights a constant blinding glare in my rearview mirror. It felt like a horror movie, like I was being hunted by something relentless and evil. I was in a state of pure fight or flight. My entire focus was on the road ahead. I knew there was a sharp 90-degree turn into my aunt's development, and I took it way too fast. My tires screamed in protest, and for a terrifying second, I thought I was going to lose control and crash. But the Subaru held the road. As I whipped into the quiet suburban street, I lost sight of the Charger behind me. I did not slow down until I saw my aunt's house, the porch light on, her silhouette standing in the doorway with the massive shape of Duke next to her. I pulled into her driveway, threw the car in park, and ran inside, not even bothering to grab my things. We locked all the doors and windows. My aunt held me as I sobbed, the adrenaline finally crashing, leaving me weak and trembling. After about 10 minutes, my aunt went to bed, but I could not sleep. I went into the guest room, the window of which looked out onto the street. My heart was still pounding. I peeked through the blinds, my eyes scanning the empty, silent road. My blood ran cold. A few minutes after my aunt had gone to her room, I saw it. The same black Charger, its lights off now, was cruising slowly, silently down the street. It was circling the neighborhood, hunting. It slowed down as it passed my aunt's house, and I could feel the driver's eyes on my parked car, on the lit windows. I ducked down, my heart in my throat. I was sure they were going to stop, but they did not. After a long, agonizing moment, the car continued its slow patrol and then disappeared around the corner. I stayed up the rest of the night, watching, but it did not come back. I do not know who was in that car or what they wanted from me, but I know that if my aunt had not lived so close, if I had not made that call, my story could have had a very different and much darker ending.